While I was in the hospital with a broken leg after a car accident, my wife posted pictures of herself at a party with her ex-boyfriend, captioned, "Finally free from the needy drama king and his constant demands." We'd been together 5 years. I didn't comment. This morning, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating with desperate messages and her mother begging me to reconsider. You know how they say life can change in the blink of an eye? Well, turns out it's more like the screech of tires and the crunch of metal, but hey, close enough. One minute I'm cruising home from another soul-crushing day at the office, singing off-key to some pop song on the radio, thinking the biggest drama in my life was whether to order pizza or actually cook something that didn't come from a box. The next minute, I'm getting a very personal introduction to a Mack truck that apparently thought red lights were more like suggestions than actual traffic laws. The whole thing happened so fast it felt like watching someone else's nightmare in slow motion. I was sitting at the intersection of 5th and Main. You know, the one with that sketchy gas station where they sell lottery tickets and questionable hot dogs, waiting for the light to turn green like a law-abiding citizen. Meanwhile, some genius in an 18-wheeler decided physics and traffic signals didn't apply to him. The impact hit my driver's side door with all the subtlety of a freight train meeting a paper airplane. The sound was unreal, like someone had taken a giant tin can and crushed it between their hands. Except the tin can happened to be my Honda Civic, and someone's hands happened to be several tons of Detroit steel. My airbag deployed with the enthusiasm of a jack-in-the-box on steroids, smacking me in the face hard enough to make me see stars that definitely weren't part of the night sky. The steering wheel twisted in my hands like it was made of Play-Doh, and suddenly I was doing this weird spinning dance across 3 lanes of traffic that I definitely hadn't signed up for. Then everything went black, which was honestly a mercy because I'm pretty sure watching my car turn into modern art wouldn't have been great for my mental health. I woke up in St. Mary's Hospital feeling like I'd been run over by a truck, which, technically speaking, I had been. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps, and the smell of antiseptic mixed with whatever they were serving for dinner made my stomach do somersaults. A nurse with scrubs covered in cartoon cats informed me with way too much cheerfulness that I was very lucky to be alive. Lucky, right? Because nothing says winning the lottery like waking up with a leg that looked like it belonged in a Picasso painting and ribs that felt like someone had used them for percussion practice. The damage report read like a grocery list from hell. 1 broken leg, the fancy kind that required surgery and metal hardware. 3 cracked ribs. Apparently, they don't make casts for those. Who knew? And a concussion that made thinking feel like wading through molasses. The leg was the real winner, though, completely shattered in 2 places, requiring enough screws and plates to set off airport security for the rest of my natural life. The doctor, a guy who looked like he should still be asking permission to use the bathroom, explained the whole situation with the kind of professional detachment you'd use to discuss the weather. "You're looking at 8 to 12 weeks of recovery," he said, scribbling notes on his clipboard like he was writing my grocery list. "No weight bearing on that leg for at least 6 weeks. You'll need help with daily activities." Daily activities. Like that wasn't a euphemism for everything from showering to reaching the TV remote without falling face first into the coffee table. The pain medication made everything fuzzy around the edges, like watching life through an Instagram filter designed by someone who'd never actually used Instagram. Every breath felt like someone was driving nails into my chest, and moving my leg was about as pleasant as sticking my hand in a blender. But the physical pain? That was nothing compared to the emotional sucker punch that was about to land. Clara showed up on day 2, sweeping into my hospital room like she was making a grand entrance at some charity gala. She'd clearly put effort into looking the part of the concerned wife. Lipstick perfectly applied, hair styled like she was heading to brunch instead of visiting her husband, who'd nearly become street pizza. She perched on the edge of the uncomfortable plastic chair next to my bed, checking her phone more than she checked on me. "Oh, honey, you look terrible," she said, which really wasn't the greeting I'd been hoping for. These places just give me such anxiety. All the germs and sick people everywhere. She glanced around the room like she expected to catch something fatal just from breathing the air. 20 minutes. That's how long my loving wife of 5 years could stand to stay by my bedside after I'd almost died. 20 minutes before she started making excuses about having somewhere else to be, someone else to see. Something else that was apparently more important than the fact that her husband was held together with surgical tape and good intentions. But Marcus? Marcus was a different story entirely. My best friend since college showed up with a bag of real food, not the rubber chicken and mystery vegetables they were trying to pass off as meals in this place, and parked himself in that same plastic chair for hours. He helped me figure out how to use the bathroom without falling over. Dignity is apparently optional when you can't put weight on one leg. Brought me books to read when staring at the ceiling got old, and actually listened when I tried to process what had happened. "Dude, you scared the hell out of me," he said, unwrapping what might have been the most beautiful cheeseburger I'd ever seen. "When they called and said you were in an accident, I thought." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. The relief in his eyes said everything. That contrast hit me like a second truck. Here was my wife, who supposedly loved me more than anyone else in the world, treating my near-death experience like an inconvenience that was interfering with her social calendar. And here was my friend, dropping everything to make sure I wasn't alone, bringing me actual food because he knew the hospital stuff tasted like cardboard soaked in disappointment. Lying there in that hospital bed, doped up on painkillers and trying to make sense of what had just happened to my life, I started to see things with a clarity that had nothing to do with the medication wearing off. Sometimes it takes a truck running a red light to show you what really matters. Sometimes it takes almost losing everything to realize you might not have had much to lose in the first place. The accident had changed everything, all right, just not in the way I'd expected. Day 3 in paradise. And by paradise, I mean a sterile hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and crushed dreams. I was finally starting to feel human again. Well, human adjacent. The morphine drip had been dialed back enough that I could think in complete sentences, and the swelling around my eyes had gone down to the point where I no longer looked like I'd gone 10 rounds with Mike Tyson's angrier brother. Progress, right? I'd been staring at the water stains on the ceiling tiles for what felt like 17 hours straight, trying to find shapes in them like some kind of twisted Rorschach test. That one looked like a duck. That one looked like my car after it got intimate with a semi-truck. That one looked suspiciously like my will to live, barely there and getting smaller by the minute. "Hey, can you hand me my phone?" I asked Marcus, who was sprawled in the world's most uncomfortable visitor chair, scrolling through his own device. I should probably check in with work, let them know I'm not just playing hooky in some tropical paradise. Marcus looked up from his screen, and I swear I saw something flicker across his face. Hesitation? Concern? Gas from the hospital cafeteria burrito he'd foolishly consumed an hour earlier? Hard to tell, but he definitely wasn't jumping up to grab my phone from the bedside table. "Maybe you should rest a little more," he said, not meeting my eyes. "You know, let the brain fog clear up completely before you start dealing with all that stuff." Brain fog. Right. Because apparently getting your skull rattled around like a maraca wasn't great for cognitive function. Who knew? But something about the way he said it, the way he was suddenly very interested in his shoelaces, set off every alarm bell I had left after the accident had knocked most of them loose. "Marcus." I used the tone I usually reserved for telemarketers and people who talk during movies. "Give me my damn phone." He sighed like I'd asked him to donate a kidney, but he reached over and handed me the device. The screen lit up with a barrage of notifications, missed calls, texts, social media alerts. Normal stuff, except for the weird looks Marcus kept shooting me, like he was watching someone about to step on a landmine. I opened Instagram first because apparently I hate myself and enjoy emotional torture. The app loaded with all the efficiency of a government website, and then boom, there it was, right at the top of my feed like a neon sign advertising my complete and utter humiliation. Clara, my loving, devoted wife, at some swanky rooftop bar I definitely couldn't afford, looking like she'd stepped off the cover of a magazine titled "How to Destroy Your Husband's Soul" in one post. She was wearing that little black dress I'd bought her for our anniversary last year, the one that cost more than my monthly car payment. Her arm was draped over some guy's shoulder with the casualness of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. But it wasn't just any guy. Oh no, that would have been too simple, too clean. It was Adrian. Adrian fucking Morrison, her ex-boyfriend from college. The same Adrian she'd sworn up and down was just a friend when he started commenting heart eye emojis on her selfies 6 months ago. The same Adrian she'd gotten defensive about when I'd mentioned maybe it was weird that she texted him at midnight. The same Adrian who apparently had been waiting in the wings like an understudy in the world's most depressing Broadway show. The caption was the real knife twist, though. Posted just 2 hours ago, while I was lying here wondering if my leg would ever work properly again. Finally free from the needy drama king and his constant demands. Time to live my life for me. Hashtag no regrets, hashtag fresh start, hashtag living my truth. Needy drama king. Constant demands. I read it 3 times, each time feeling like someone was pouring ice water directly into my bloodstream. 5 years of marriage, and apparently my crime was what? Asking her to contribute to rent occasionally? Expecting her to act like a partner instead of a very expensive house guest? Hoping she might visit her husband in the hospital for more than 20 minutes? The comments were somehow even worse than the post itself. A parade of her girlfriends cheering her on like she'd just won the lottery instead of publicly humiliating her hospitalized husband. Good for you, girl. You deserve so much better. That toxic energy was holding you back. Finally ditching the dead weight. Dead weight. I was literally dead weight. Couldn't even walk without assistance. And they were celebrating like it was some kind of victory. Not one of them, not a single person in that digital peanut gallery, bothered to ask the obvious question. Hey Clara, isn't your husband currently in the hospital after nearly dying in a car accident? I kept scrolling through the comments like a masochist, each one a fresh paper cut on an already gaping wound. People I'd had over for dinner, people I'd helped move apartments, people whose birthday parties I'd attended with Clara for years. All of them acting like I was some kind of monster she'd heroically escaped from. Dude, Marcus said quietly, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. You should probably put the phone down. But I couldn't stop. It was like watching a car accident in slow motion, except I was both the spectator and the victim. I clicked on Adrian's profile, because apparently I enjoyed pain more than I'd previously realized. His latest post was from the same bar, same night. Him and Clara looking cozy in a corner booth, his hand resting possessively on her thigh. The caption, sometimes the best things in life are worth waiting for. Patience pays off. Hashtag second chances, hashtag right person, wrong time. Right person, wrong time. Meaning what? That he'd been waiting for me to almost die so he could swoop in? That my near-death experience was just convenient timing for their romantic reunion? The whole thing was so calculated, so deliberately cruel, that I actually felt impressed by the sheer audacity of it. My chest felt tight, and for a second I wondered if something was wrong with my ribs again. But no, this was different. This was the feeling of 5 years of your life being reduced to a social media celebration, of realizing that the person you'd planned to grow old with had been planning her exit strategy while you were unconscious in the ICU. How long? I asked Marcus, not looking up from the screen. What? How long has this been going on? I gestured weakly at the phone. Don't pretend you don't know. That look on your face when I asked for my phone. You knew. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. I wasn't sure. I mean, I suspected something was off, but how long? He sighed. I saw them together at Starbucks about a month ago. Thought it was weird, but Clara said they were just catching up. Then last week, before your accident, Jenny mentioned seeing Clara's car at his place overnight. A month. A month of lies. Of her coming home late with excuses about girls' nights and work events. Of her being distant and irritable whenever I tried to be affectionate. A month of planning and scheming while I worked overtime to pay for the life she was already mentally checking out of. The worst part? I wasn't even surprised. Somewhere deep down, in that place where you keep the truths you don't want to acknowledge, I'd known something was wrong. I'd just chosen to believe her lies because facing the truth would have meant admitting that my marriage was as broken as my leg, just less obviously so. I set the phone down on the bedside table with the care of someone handling explosives. My hands were shaking, though whether from anger or shock or the cocktail of medications in my system, I couldn't tell. Well, I said finally, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. I guess that settles that. The funny thing about betrayal is how it crystallizes everything. 1 minute you're floating through life in this comfortable haze of denial and wishful thinking, and the next minute you're seeing everything with the kind of clarity that would make a telescope jealous. Lying there in that hospital bed, staring at my phone like it had just delivered news of an alien invasion, I felt something shift inside me. Not break. That had already happened when the truck decided to redecorate my car. This was different. This was like a switch flipping, a door slamming shut, a decision being made without me even realizing I was making it. I didn't call Clara, didn't text her, didn't slide into her Instagram DMs with a passive-aggressive comment about her poor timing or questionable life choices. Hell, I didn't even unfriend her on social media, because that would have required acknowledging that what she'd done mattered enough to warrant a response. And here's the thing that probably would have surprised her if she'd bothered to think about it for 5 seconds. It didn't. Not anymore. Instead, I did something that Clara had never been able to handle in all our years together. I got quiet. Real quiet. The kind of quiet that made nurses ask if I was feeling depressed and needed to talk to someone. The kind of quiet that made Marcus bring me extra snacks and hover around my bedside like he was afraid I might do something dramatic. But this wasn't depression or despair or any of the emotional theatrics Clara would have expected from her needy drama king. This was calculation. See, when you're stuck in a hospital bed with nothing but time and a newfangled appreciation for how short life really is, your mind starts working in interesting ways. Mine started doing math. Not the kind they teach you in school, but the kind that matters when you're tallying up the score of a relationship that just revealed itself to be more one-sided than a conversation with a brick wall. Let's start with the big-ticket items, shall we? Rent. Our apartment. Well, my apartment, since only my name was on the lease because Clara's credit score looked like a phone number from the 1800s, cost $1,800 a month. Over the past year, Clara's contributions to that monthly expense totaled a whopping $0. Oh, she'd occasionally throw me $20 for groceries or offer to split a pizza, but actual rent? The thing that kept us from becoming homeless? That was apparently my job and my job alone. Utilities were the same story. Electric bill, gas bill, internet, cable, all of it flowing out of my checking account like I was some kind of one-man charity organization dedicated to keeping Clara comfortable. She justified it by saying she was between jobs or figuring out her career path, or my personal favorite, investing in herself. Investing in herself apparently meant spending her days at yoga studios and coffee shops while I picked up overtime shifts to cover the difference. Then there were the smaller things, the death by 1,000 cuts expenses that you don't really notice until you start paying attention. Her car insurance, because hers had lapsed. Her credit card payments, because she was just behind this month, every month for the past 2 years. The groceries, the dinners out, the little weekend trips she insisted we needed to reconnect, but somehow never had money for. All of it adding up to a very expensive lesson in what it means to carry someone who has no intention of ever returning the favor. But the math wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was remembering all the times I'd defended her to other people. My sister Leah had tried to warn me 6 months ago, sitting in my kitchen and watching Clara order another designer handbag online while complaining about being broke. "She's using you," Leah had said, and I'd gotten defensive, talking about how relationships were about supporting each other and how Clara was going through a tough time finding herself. Finding herself. Jesus. Turns out she'd found herself just fine, wrapped around her ex-boyfriend at some overpriced cocktail lounge, celebrating her freedom from the guy who'd been funding her self-discovery journey. Marcus brought me a burger from that place down the street, the one with the ridiculous portions and the waitresses who called everyone Han. He set it down on the rolling table and gave me a look that suggested he was conducting some kind of mental health assessment. "You've been quiet," he said, settling into the plastic chair that had probably been designed by someone who'd never actually sat in a chair before. "Like, really quiet. It's kind of freaking me out. Just thinking," I said, unwrapping the burger with the care of someone performing surgery. "You know how people always say that when something bad happens, it gives you perspective? Well, turns out they're right. I'm getting all kinds of perspective." "Yeah? What kind of perspective?" I took a bite of the burger, which was exactly the kind of greasy, unpretentious food that Clara would have wrinkled her nose at. She was always trying to get me to eat at those trendy places with names like Farm and Table, where they charged $30 for what amounted to a salad with delusions of grandeur. The kind where you realize you've been playing a game where the other person changed all the rules without telling you, I said. The kind where you figure out that being alone might actually be better than being with someone who sees you as a walking ATM with emotional baggage. Marcus nodded slowly, like he was processing something he'd been thinking about for a while. "So what are you going to do?" That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? What was I going to do? The old me, the me from last week, would have probably tried to save the marriage. Would have called Clara, begged her to come back, promised to change, offered to go to couples therapy or take salsa dancing lessons or whatever the hell she thought would fix the problems she'd invented to justify her affair. But that me had been in a car that got turned into abstract art by a Mack truck. This me, the me that was held together with surgical steel and hard-won wisdom, had different ideas. I'm going to get better, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. And then I'm going to clean house. Clean house. Figure of speech. I'm going to take stock of what's actually mine and what I've been letting other people take credit for. Starting with that apartment that's apparently been financing Clara's journey of self-discovery. The plan wasn't fully formed yet, just a rough outline sketched in the margins of my consciousness while I'd been lying there pretending to watch daytime television. But the foundation was solid. I was done being the guy who paid for everyone else's dreams while mine collected dust in the corner. My sister was going to help. Marcus was going to help. Hell, even Mr. Franklin, my landlord, was going to help, though he didn't know it yet. Because here's what Clara had never bothered to learn about me in 5 years of marriage. I might be quiet, but I'm not stupid. I might be generous, but I'm not a pushover. And I definitely wasn't the needy drama king she'd painted me as on social media. I was just a guy who'd finally realized the difference between being alone and being lonely. And right now, even with a broken leg and a chest full of cracked ribs, I was feeling less lonely than I had in months. 2 weeks later, I was finally sprung from what the hospital staff cheerfully called recovery and what I'd started thinking of as expensive captivity with terrible food. My leg was wrapped in enough hardware to build a small aircraft, and walking required the kind of coordination I hadn't needed since learning to tie my shoes. But I was mobile. Sort of. In the way that a 3-legged dog is mobile, determined, slightly pathetic, but getting the job done. Marcus had offered his couch, which was both generous and necessary since going back to my apartment would have meant facing Clara's inevitable return and the awkward conversation that would follow. You know, the one where she'd probably try to gaslight me into believing that celebrating her freedom while I was unconscious in the ICU was somehow my fault for being too emotionally demanding. Hard pass on that particular theater production. But here's the thing about having really good friends and family who've watched you get walked all over for years. Sometimes they're more ready for revenge than you are. I was still in the careful planning stages of my new life strategy when Leah showed up at Marcus's place with a look in her eyes that made me think of generals preparing for battle. "All right, big brother," she said, settling into Marcus's kitchen chair like she was calling a board meeting to order. "We need to talk." Leah had never liked Clara, which I'd always attributed to sisterly protectiveness and maybe a little jealousy. Turns out it was actually just superior judgment and pattern recognition. Who knew? "I've been thinking about your situation," she continued, pulling out her phone and showing me something that made my blood pressure spike. It was Clara's Instagram story from the night before. Her and Adrian at some fancy restaurant, the kind with cloth napkins and servers who introduced themselves by name. She was wearing earrings I'd bought her for Christmas last year, laughing at something he'd said like she didn't have a care in the world. "She's been posting constantly," Leah said. "Living it up, spending money she doesn't have, acting like she's some kind of liberated woman who just escaped from prison. Meanwhile, you're here recovering from nearly dying, and she hasn't even bothered to ask how you're doing." Marcus leaned against the counter, nodding along like Leah was preaching gospel. "It's messed up, man. Like, really messed up. So here's what we're going to do," Leah said, and I realized this wasn't a consultation. This was a briefing. "You still have the key to your apartment, right? The one that's in your name, that you've been paying for, that she's been treating like her personal luxury resort." I nodded, though I had a feeling I knew where this was going, and it involved activities that might not be entirely legal, or at least not entirely mature. But then again, mature was overrated, and legal was negotiable when someone had spent the better part of a year financially abusing you while planning their exit strategy. "She doesn't know you're out of the hospital yet," Leah continued. "According to her social media, she thinks you're still laid up for another week. That gives us a window." The plan was elegant in its simplicity and absolutely ruthless in its execution. While Clara was off playing house with Adrian, we were going to help her complete her transition to her new life by removing all traces of her old one. Everything she'd left behind in my apartment, and by everything, Leah meant everything, was going to disappear. But where are we going to put all her stuff? I asked, because even in my newly hardened state, I wasn't quite ready to cross certain lines. I'm not burning her belongings in the parking lot, no matter how therapeutic that might sound. Leah and Marcus exchanged a look that made me nervous. We're not going to put it anywhere, Marcus said slowly. We're going to throw it away. All of it, Leah confirmed. Her clothes, her makeup, her shoes, her books, her stupid decorative pillows that served no functional purpose except making the couch uncomfortable. All of it goes in the dumpster behind your building. The idea was so audacious, so completely over the top, that I actually laughed, which hurt my ribs, but it was worth it. Clara, who'd spent years accumulating possessions like she was preparing for a zombie apocalypse at Nordstrom, would come home to find her material world had simply ceased to exist. I paused, trying to find the right word. That's nuclear. She went nuclear first, Leah pointed out. She nuked your marriage while you were unconscious in a hospital bed. This is just returning fire. It took us 3 trips and most of a Saturday afternoon. Marcus brought his pickup truck, Leah brought industrial-strength garbage bags, and I brought a level of vindictive satisfaction I didn't know I was capable of. We started with her closet, which looked like a department store had exploded inside a rainbow. Dresses she'd worn once, shoes that cost more than most people's rent, handbags for every possible occasion, including several I was pretty sure didn't exist. Into the bags it went. The little black dress she'd worn to celebrate her freedom? Gone. The designer heels that had put us behind on the electric bill 3 months ago? History. The collection of handbags that had their own dedicated shelf like they were museum pieces? Now they were making friends with coffee grounds and pizza boxes in the dumpster. Her makeup collection was particularly satisfying to dispose of, mostly because it represented about 6 months' worth of grocery money. Foundation that cost more per ounce than decent whiskey, lipstick in 47 slightly different shades of red, enough eyeshadow to paint a small house. All of it joined the great landfill in the sky. We weren't completely heartless. I kept her important documents, passport, birth certificate, social security card, some family photos that predated our relationship. Those went into a small box that I left with Mr. Franklin at the front desk, along with a note explaining that Clara could pick up her essentials at her convenience. Everything else was getting acquainted with the waste management system of Greater Metropolitan wherever the hell we lived. The wine fridge was Marcus's idea, and honestly, it was probably the most satisfying part of the whole operation. Clara had insisted we needed a dedicated wine fridge for her collection, which consisted mostly of bottles she'd bought and never opened because she was saving them for special occasions. Apparently, celebrating the end of our marriage while I was in the hospital hadn't qualified as special enough, because the thing was still full. Seems like a waste to throw away perfectly good wine, Marcus said, loading bottles into a cooler he'd thoughtfully brought along. You're right, I agreed. We should donate it to a good cause. Like my recovery. By the time we were finished, my apartment looked like a completely different place. Gone were the throw pillows that had served no purpose except making it impossible to actually sit comfortably on my own couch. Gone was the decorative mirror that had cost $300 and reflected nothing but bad decisions. Gone were the scented candles that had made the place smell like a funeral home having an identity crisis. For the first time in years, my apartment looked like it belonged to me. Clean, functional, uncluttered by someone else's need to fill every available surface with stuff that looked expensive and served no purpose. How do you feel? Leah asked, surveying our handiwork with the satisfaction of a general who'd just won a decisive battle. I looked around at what used to be our apartment and was now, definitively and completely mine. Empty hangers swayed gently in the closet like wind chimes celebrating freedom. The bathroom counter, previously invisible under an avalanche of products promising eternal youth and perfect skin, now showed its actual surface for the first time in memory. Lighter, I said, and meant it in every possible way. You know what they say about karma being a bitch? Well, sometimes karma needs a little help from friends in strategic places, and lucky for me, I had exactly the right friend in exactly the right place. 3 days after we'd transformed Clara's material world into landfill fodder, I was sitting in Marcus's living room with my laptop, scrolling through LinkedIn like a man with a mission. Which, technically I was. See, Clara hadn't just been sitting around eating bonbons and planning her escape strategy during our marriage. No, she'd actually been somewhat productive in her scheming. About 2 months ago, she'd started talking excitedly about this amazing opportunity at a boutique marketing firm downtown. Pivot Marketing Solutions, one of those companies with a name that sounded like it was generated by a business buzzword algorithm, but apparently paid well enough to make Clara's eyes light up like slot machines hitting jackpot. The thing was, she hadn't exactly landed this job through her own networking prowess or stunning resume. Clara's work history looked like a game of career hopscotch played by someone who kept forgetting the rules. 6 months here, a year there, always leaving because the boss didn't appreciate her creative vision or the company wasn't aligned with her values. What she had was me, and more specifically, my connection to Dave Martinez. Dave and I had worked together at my previous job for 3 years. He was one of those genuinely decent guys who somehow managed to climb the corporate ladder without stepping on anyone's neck in the process. We'd kept in touch after he moved to a bigger firm, grabbing beers occasionally and commiserating about the weird world of office politics. When he'd mentioned that his new company was looking for someone with Clara's supposed skill set, I'd made the call. Hey Dave, remember my wife Clara I've told you about? She's looking for something in marketing, and she's really creative. The conversation had been easy, friendly, the kind of favor you do for a buddy because that's what decent people do for each other. Dave had been happy to help, had fast-tracked Clara's resume to the hiring manager, had basically gift-wrapped an opportunity that most people would have killed for. And now, sitting in Marcus's apartment with my laptop warming my good leg and a level of vindictive clarity I was still getting used to, I decided it was time to unwrap that gift and return it to sender. I pulled up Dave's contact info and hit dial, my heart doing that thing where it speeds up just enough to remind you that you're about to burn a bridge. Except this wasn't really burning a bridge. This was more like pointing out that the bridge had been built on quicksand, and maybe everyone should know about it before they tried to cross. Hey man. Dave's voice was warm and familiar, the sound of someone genuinely happy to hear from you. It almost made me feel guilty. Almost. How are you feeling? Marcus told me about the accident. That's some scary shit. Yeah, it's been a ride, I said, settling back into the couch cushions. But I'm on the mend. Actually, that's kind of why I'm calling. I wanted to talk to you about Clara and that position at your company. Oh right, the marketing coordinator thing. She starts Monday, actually. Really excited to have her on board. Thanks again for the recommendation, by the way. She interviewed really well. Of course she did. Clara could charm the paint off walls when she wanted something. It was one of her more impressive skills, right up there with spending other people's money and justifying questionable life choices. About that, I said, pulling up her Instagram on my laptop. I think there might be some things you should know before she starts. Things that might affect her ability to, actually show up and do the job. Dave's tone shifted slightly, the casual friendliness replaced by something more cautious. What kind of things? I started with the social media evidence, because nothing says professional employee like publicly celebrating your husband's hospitalization while you party with your ex. I walked him through the timeline, the accident, the Instagram post, the subsequent parade of celebration photos from someone who was supposedly devastated by her husband's near-death experience. Jesus, Dave muttered after I'd read him Clara's, finally free from the needy drama king caption. She posted that while you were in the hospital? Gets better, I said, clicking through to her more recent posts. This was yesterday. I described the latest photo, Clara and Adrian at some expensive spa in the hills, the kind of place that charged more for a facial than most people made in a week. Her caption was a masterpiece of tone-deaf privilege. Self-care Sunday with my amazing partner. Life is so much better when you prioritize your own happiness. Hashtag self-love, hashtag new beginnings, hashtag living my best life. She's posting about her new partner, Dave said slowly. While wait, are you guys divorced? Nope, still married. She just decided to upgrade models without bothering to trade in the old one first. There was a long pause, the kind that suggested Dave was reassessing everything he thought he knew about my wife's character, which was exactly what I'd been hoping for. Look, I continued, I'm not trying to sabotage her out of spite. Well, maybe a little spite. But mostly I'm trying to save you guys some headaches. You know how she gets when things don't go her way. Remember that story I told you about her quitting her last job because they expected her to actually show up for meetings? Dave laughed, but it was the uncomfortable kind of laugh people do when they realize they've made a mistake. Yeah, I remember. You said she was going through a tough time, learning to be more professional, right? Well, turns out the tough time was planning her exit strategy from our marriage while I paid her bills. And the professional development was mostly Instagram tutorials on how to take the perfect breakup selfie. I could hear Dave typing in the background, probably pulling up Clara's social media to see the evidence for himself. The typing got faster, then stopped abruptly. Holy shit, he said. Is this her at Nobu last night? That place costs like $300 a person. Probably celebrating her new job. The one that starts Monday. The one she got because I vouched for her work ethic and reliability. More typing, more silence, then a long exhale that sounded like someone deflating a balloon. I have to ask, Dave said finally. What's her financial situation like? Because we're talking about someone who's going to be handling client budgets, dealing with vendor payments. This was the opening I'd been waiting for. I told him about Clara's credit score, which looked like a phone number from when phones had 4 digits. I told him about the unpaid bills, the maxed out credit cards, the rent she'd never contributed to despite living in my apartment for over a year. I told him about finding out, through some creative detective work involving her browser history, that she'd been applying for loans using my income information without my knowledge. She's not just unreliable, I concluded. She's actively dishonest about money. And honestly, Dave, I don't think you want someone handling your client's marketing budgets when she can't handle her own finances. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Dave asking increasingly pointed questions about Clara's work history, her reliability, her tendency to disappear when things got difficult. By the end of it, I could hear the decision crystallizing in his voice. I really appreciate you telling me this, he said. I mean, I know this can't be easy, given everything you're dealing with. It's not about easy, I said. It's about not letting someone else get screwed over by the same person who screwed me over. You're a good guy, Dave. Your company deserves better than what Clara is going to bring to the table. After I hung up, I sat in Marcus's living room feeling something I hadn't expected, relief. Not satisfaction, not revenge, just pure relief that I'd finally stopped covering for someone who'd never bothered to cover for me. For 5 years, I'd been making excuses for Clara's behavior, smoothing over her mistakes, vouching for her character when I should have been questioning it myself. My phone buzzed with a text from Dave an hour later. Offer rescinded. Thanks for the heads up. Beers on me next time. Clara's phone started ringing around 5 p.m. I didn't answer, obviously, but I could picture her face when she got the call from HR, the confusion turning to panic as she realized her safety net had just been yanked out from under her. For someone who'd spent years coasting on other people's goodwill and financial support, reality was about to become a very expensive lesson. Margaret Morrison had always been what my grandmother would have politely called a piece of work. In less polite company, she was the kind of mother-in-law who made sitcom writers thank their lucky stars for easy material. Picture a woman who'd never met a problem she couldn't solve by throwing money at it, or a conversation she couldn't dominate with her opinions about everyone else's life choices. She had the kind of confidence that came from never having to face real consequences, the sort of privileged obliviousness that allowed her to give unsolicited advice about marriage while being on husband number 3 herself. For 5 years, Margaret had treated me like I was some kind of charity case that her daughter had graciously taken on. Every family gathering included at least one pointed comment about how lucky I was to be with Clara, how I should be grateful for everything her daughter brought to the relationship. Never mind that what Clara mostly brought was a talent for spending money she didn't have and an impressive collection of reasons why contributing to household expenses was beneath her. Margaret's house in the suburbs was the kind of place that screamed, I peaked in the 80s and refused to acknowledge it. All mauve and gold accents, with enough decorative geese to populate a small lake. She'd made it clear from day one that she considered me a temporary inconvenience in Clara's journey toward finding someone more suitable, which apparently meant someone with a trust fund and a summer house in the Hamptons. So when my phone started ringing at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday with Margaret's contact info lighting up the screen, I knew Clara had finally told her family about our little marital situation. What I didn't expect was for the calls to continue. And continue. And continue. By noon, I'd ignored 17 calls from Margaret Morrison. 17. That's the kind of persistence usually reserved for telemarketers and stalkers, but apparently also for mothers-in-law who'd just discovered their perfect daughter wasn't quite as perfect as advertised. Marcus, who'd been watching this digital harassment with growing amusement, finally looked up from his laptop, where he was pretending to work while actually watching me ignore phone calls like it was performance art. "Dude, you're going to have to answer eventually," he said, gesturing at my phone, which had started vibrating again. "Call number 18. She's not going to give up. Women like that don't give up. They just get louder." He was right, of course. Margaret Morrison wasn't the type to take a hint, subtle or otherwise. She was the type to show up at your workplace if you didn't return her calls, to corner your friends at the grocery store, to make your life miserable until you paid attention to whatever crisis she decided required your immediate intervention. So when the phone rang for the 19th time, I answered. "Hello, Margaret." "Oh, thank God," she said, and I was immediately struck by how different she sounded. Gone was the imperious tone I'd grown accustomed to, the voice of someone who was used to being the authority on everything. This voice was shaky, uncertain, almost fragile. "I've been trying to reach you for hours." I noticed. "What's up?" "It's about Clara." She paused, and I could hear her taking one of those deep breaths people take when they're about to say something they really don't want to say. "She came home last night. She's staying in her old room." Her old room. Clara had moved back in with Mommy. The woman who'd been celebrating her independence and freedom from the needy drama king had crawled back to her childhood bedroom like she was 17 again and had just gotten grounded for missing curfew. "Okay," I said, because what else was I supposed to say? "Congratulations? I'm sorry for your loss." She told me about the apartment, Margaret continued, her voice getting smaller with each word. "About her things being gone. About the job. She's very upset. I bet she is. She says you threw away everything she owned. Just threw it all away like it was garbage." "That's not entirely accurate," I said, settling back into Marcus's couch and preparing for what was clearly going to be a longer conversation than I'd hoped. "I kept her important documents. Birth certificate, passport, family photos. Left them with the landlord. Everything else, well, everything else was just stuff she'd accumulated while I paid for her life." Margaret was quiet for a long moment, the kind of silence that suggested she was processing information that didn't match the story she'd been told. "She said you were being vindictive," she said finally, "that you were trying to punish her for finding happiness." "Margaret, did Clara tell you how she announced this happiness to the world?" "What do you mean?" I pulled up Clara's Instagram and read her the caption, word for word. "The finally free from the needy drama king post, complete with timestamp showing it had been posted while I was still unconscious in the ICU after nearly dying in a car accident." The silence that followed was so complete, I actually checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "She posted that while you were in the hospital?" Margaret's voice had gotten very small, very quiet. "Gets better," I said, and told her about the party photos, the celebration posts, the parade of friends congratulating Clara on her escape from the burden of having a husband who expected things like loyalty and basic human decency. More silence. I could practically hear Margaret's worldview reshuffling itself, trying to accommodate information that didn't fit the narrative Clara had been feeding her. "She told me you were unstable," Margaret said slowly, "that you couldn't hold down a job, that you were financially irresponsible. She said the apartment was hers, that she'd been supporting you." "Margaret, I've been working at the same company for 3 years. I've never missed a day of work except when I was unconscious in the hospital. Every bill for that apartment has my name on it because Clara's credit score is somewhere south of dismal. She hasn't paid rent in over a year." I could hear her breathing change, getting faster, more shallow. "The car," she said suddenly. "She said the car you drive was a gift from her. It's a 2018 Honda Civic with my name on the title and my payments coming out of my checking account every month. Clara doesn't even have a license that isn't suspended for unpaid tickets." Oh my God, it was barely a whisper. "Margaret, how much money have you given Clara in the past year?" The pause was long enough to confirm what I'd already suspected. "She said you were in financial trouble," Margaret said, her voice breaking slightly. "She said you'd gotten behind on rent, that you were going to be evicted. She needed money to help you out." "How much?" $8,000. Over 6 months. $8,000. Clara had been borrowing money from her family under the pretense of helping her financially struggling husband, while said husband worked overtime to cover the bills she refused to help with. It was breathtakingly audacious, even for Clara. Margaret, I've never been behind on rent. I've never asked Clara for money. I've never even met most of your family because Clara always said they were too busy when I suggested getting together. I could hear her crying now, soft sobs that suggested the full scope of Clara's deception was finally sinking in. For 5 years, Margaret had looked down on me as some kind of deadbeat who was lucky to have her daughter. Turns out, her daughter had been running a con game so elaborate it would have impressed a professional grifter. I don't understand, Margaret said through her tears. Why would she lie about all this? Why would she make you sound like the kind of person who deserved to be abandoned while he was in the hospital? I suggested. She's my daughter, Margaret said, and her voice was filled with the kind of bewilderment that comes from realizing you don't actually know someone you thought you knew completely. I raised her. I taught her right from wrong. I don't understand how she became this person. People become who they need to be to get what they want, I said. Clara wanted freedom from responsibility, financial support without strings attached, and sympathy for being the victim of a terrible marriage. So she became the person who could get those things. Margaret was quiet for a long time, processing the wreckage of everything she believed about her daughter and her daughter's marriage. What happens now? She asked finally. Now Clara learns what it's like to face consequences for her choices. For the first time in her adult life, probably. She's talking about coming back, Margaret said, trying to work things out with you. She says she made a mistake, that she wants to fix things. I laughed, which probably wasn't the response Margaret was expecting, but it was the only response that made sense. Margaret, Clara doesn't want to fix anything. Clara wants her safety net back. She wants someone to pay her bills and clean up her messes while she figures out her next move. The only mistake she thinks she made was getting caught. So what should I tell her? I thought about it for a moment. About 5 years of being treated like a walking wallet with attachment issues. About waking up in the hospital to find my wife celebrating my accident as her liberation. About all the ways Clara had systematically dismantled my sense of self-worth while building her case for why she deserved better. Tell her good luck, I said finally. And maybe stop giving her money. It's not helping her become a better person. It's just enabling her to avoid growing up. The thing about lies is they're like potato chips. You can never have just one. Each lie requires 3 more lies to support it. And those require 6 more. And pretty soon you're running a full-time fiction factory just to keep your story straight. Clara, it turned out, wasn't just a casual liar. She was a goddamn artist, a Michelangelo of manipulation who'd been painting masterpieces of deception for years while I stood there applauding her creativity. Margaret called me back the next day, and this time her voice had that hollow quality people get when they've spent the night staring at the ceiling, reassessing their entire understanding of reality. She'd clearly been doing some detective work of her own, probably going through old conversations and text messages, connecting dots that should have been obvious but had been camouflaged by years of wanting to believe the best about her daughter. I need to tell you something, she said without preamble, skipping right past the usual pleasantries. About the money. About what Clara told us. I was sitting in Marcus's kitchen, drinking coffee that was strong enough to wake the dead, and scrolling through job listings on my laptop. Recovery was expensive, and sitting around plotting revenge didn't pay the bills, no matter how personally satisfying it might be. I'm listening, I said, because Margaret's tone suggested this was going to be a conversation that required my full attention. She's been borrowing money from all of us, Margaret began, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. Not just me. Her father, her sister, even her grandmother. Different amounts, different stories, but always about helping you out of some financial crisis. I set down my coffee cup harder than I'd intended, the ceramic making a sharp crack against the wooden table. How much are we talking about here, Margaret? From me? 8,000, like I told you. But from everyone combined. She paused, and I could practically hear her doing math in her head. At least $20,000. Maybe more. She told my mother you had gambling debts. She told her father you'd been laid off and were too proud to ask for help. She told her sister you had medical bills from some mysterious chronic condition. $20,000. $20,000 that Clara had borrowed from her family to supposedly help her deadbeat husband, while said deadbeat husband was working 60-hour weeks to keep them afloat financially. It was so audacious, so completely over the top, that I actually felt a grudging admiration for the sheer scope of the operation. But that's not even the worst part, Margaret continued, and I could hear her voice starting to shake with what sounded like a combination of rage and humiliation. The worst part is what she told us about you, about who you were as a person. I'm almost afraid to ask. She said you were emotionally abusive, that you controlled her finances, wouldn't let her have her own bank account, monitored her spending. She said you were jealous and possessive, that you'd threaten to hurt yourself if she ever tried to leave. I sat there in Marcus's kitchen, listening to my mother-in-law describe a version of me that bore absolutely no resemblance to reality, and felt something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't just lying about money or making excuses for bad behavior. This was character assassination, a systematic campaign to destroy my reputation and justify whatever Clara wanted to do next. Margaret, I said carefully, have you ever seen me be controlling or abusive toward Clara? In 5 years of knowing me, have you ever witnessed behavior that would suggest I was the kind of person she was describing? The silence stretched long enough that I could hear Margaret's grandfather clock ticking in the background, marking time while she thought through years of family gatherings and holiday dinners, looking for evidence of the monster Clara had painted me to be. No, she said finally. Never. If anything, you were. She paused again, like she was reluctant to admit what she was thinking. You were too accommodating, too willing to let her have her way. Clara would announce plans without consulting you, spend money on things you clearly couldn't afford, and you'd just go along with it. Because I thought that's what marriage looked like, I said. I thought supporting your partner meant enabling their dreams, even when those dreams were financially irresponsible and emotionally exhausting. She told us the apartment was hers, Margaret continued, like she was confessing sins in some kind of reverse therapy session. She said she'd been the one paying rent, that your name was on the lease as a favor to you because your credit was bad. She said the car was hers, that she'd bought it and was letting you use it. Each revelation was like discovering another layer of an archaeological dig, except instead of ancient pottery, we were uncovering years of systematic lies designed to make Clara look like a victim and me look like a parasite. It was impressive in its thoroughness and absolutely devastating in its implications. She even showed us pictures, Margaret said, her voice getting smaller. Pictures of the apartment, talking about how she'd decorated it, how she'd picked out the furniture. She made it sound like you were this deadbeat boyfriend who'd moved in and taken over her space. The apartment that Clara had moved into after we got married, because she'd been living with 2 roommates in a place that looked like it had been decorated by colorblind teenagers with a Home Depot gift card. The furniture she'd picked out had been selected during a single afternoon at IKEA, where she'd pointed at things and I'd loaded them into the cart before paying for them with my credit card. Margaret, does Clara have any documentation for any of these claims? Lease agreements with her name on them? Bank statements showing rent payments? Car loan papers? I know. She said you were handling all the paperwork because she was bad with that kind of thing. Of course she did. Clara had built an entire mythology around being the victim of my financial abuse, while simultaneously being too delicate and overwhelmed to handle basic adult responsibilities like bills and documentation. It was a masterpiece of having your cake and eating it too. She got to be both the strong, independent woman who was supporting her deadbeat husband and the vulnerable victim who couldn't be expected to deal with complicated things like proof. She told us you were unemployed, Margaret continued, that you'd been laid off months ago and were too proud to tell anyone. She said you spent your days playing video games while she worked multiple jobs to keep you afloat. Margaret, you can call my office right now. I've been working there for 3 years. I've never been laid off, never been written up, never missed a day except when I was unconscious in the hospital. I don't even own a gaming console. I could hear her breathing change, becoming more rapid, more shallow. This was the sound of someone's worldview collapsing in real time, of realizing that everything you thought you knew about a situation was not just wrong, but deliberately fabricated. Why would she do this? Margaret asked, and her voice sounded very small and very lost. Why would she lie about everything? Why would she make us hate you? That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? Why had Clara spent 5 years building a case against me to my own in-laws? Why had she systematically poisoned every relationship I might have had with her family, ensuring that I would always be the outsider, the problem, the thing that was holding her back? Because, I said, the answer suddenly crystal clear. She was planning her exit strategy from the beginning. She needed everyone to believe that leaving me was not just justified, but necessary. She needed to be the hero of her own story, and heroes don't abandon their husbands in hospitals unless those husbands are monsters who deserve it. Margaret was crying again, but this time it sounded different. Not the shocked tears from our previous conversation, but something deeper, more broken. The tears of someone who'd been played for a fool and was just beginning to understand the scope of the game. I enabled this, she whispered. I believed every word. I gave her money to help a man I thought was abusing her, and instead I was funding her affair. I looked down on you for 5 years because I thought you were taking advantage of my daughter, and the whole time, your daughter was running a con game so sophisticated that Bernie Madoff would have taken notes. I finished. Margaret, you weren't stupid. You were a loving mother who believed her daughter because that's what loving mothers do. Clara counted on that. She weaponized your love for her against everyone else in her life. What do I do now? Margaret asked. How do I face her? How do I tell the rest of the family that we've all been living in some fantasy world she created? I thought about that for a moment, about 5 years of family gatherings where I'd been treated like an interloper about. Holidays spent feeling like I had to prove my worth to people who'd already been told I was worthless, about all the ways Clara's lies had shaped not just how her family saw me, but how I'd started to see myself. You tell them the truth, I said finally. All of it. And then you stop giving Clara money, stop enabling her lies, and let her face the consequences of the choices she's made. For the first time in her adult life. She's going to be furious, Margaret said. Yeah, I agreed. She probably is. But maybe that's exactly what she needs to be. You'd think that after having her job offer rescinded, her family finally seeing through her web of lies, and discovering that her belongings had become one with the city's waste management system, Clara would have gotten the message. You'd think she might have taken a moment for some self-reflection, maybe considered that her actions had consequences, perhaps even contemplated the radical idea that she'd been in the wrong. You'd be giving Clara way too much credit. Instead, what I got was a masterclass in how not to win back someone you've spectacularly betrayed. It started with the text messages, dozens of them, ranging from angry demands to know what I'd done with her things, to weepy apologies that read like they'd been written by someone who'd learned about emotions from a Hallmark card factory reject pile. Baby, I know you're hurt, but we can work through this. I made a mistake, but everyone deserves a second chance. I love you so much, and I know you love me too. Please don't throw away everything we built together. Everything we built together. Like our relationship had been some kind of collaborative construction project instead of me working double shifts while she figured out new ways to spend money we didn't have. Like she hadn't celebrated my near-death experience as her personal liberation day on social media for the entire world to see. But Clara had always been persistent when she wanted something. And apparently what she wanted now was to convince me that her very public celebration of my hospitalization had been some kind of misunderstanding, a momentary lapse in judgment that could be forgiven and forgotten if I just opened my heart to the possibility of reconciliation. The calls started next. I didn't answer them, obviously, because I wasn't a masochist and I'd already heard enough of Clara's creative interpretations of reality to last several lifetimes. But she left voicemails, each one more desperate than the last, ranging from angry accusations about how I was being unfair and vindictive to tearful pleas about how she'd realized her mistakes and wanted to make things right. I know I hurt you. She sobbed into my voicemail on Tuesday afternoon, her voice doing that breathy, little girl thing she'd always used when she wanted something. But I was confused and scared, and I didn't know how to handle seeing you in the hospital like that. I know it looked bad, but Adrian was just a friend helping me through a difficult time. It didn't mean anything. You're the one I love. You're the one I want to spend my life with. Adrian was just a friend. Right. Friends don't usually celebrate your husband's hospitalization by taking you to expensive restaurants and posing for romantic photos that get posted with captions about new beginnings. But Clara had never been particularly concerned with making her lies believable. She just counted on people being too polite or too tired to call her on them. By Thursday, the voicemails had taken on a different tone, more desperate, more unhinged. She'd clearly realized that her usual tactics weren't working, that I wasn't going to be guilt or manipulated into taking her back. The last one was almost incoherent, a rambling monologue about how I was ruining both our lives by being stubborn, how we could have a fresh start if I would just forgive her, how she'd learned from her mistakes and would be a better wife if I gave her another chance. A better wife. The woman who hadn't contributed to rent in over a year, who'd borrowed thousands of dollars from her family while claiming I was financially abusing her, who'd celebrated my accident while I was unconscious in the ICU, was promising to be a better wife. It would have been funny if it wasn't so depressing. But Clara's piece de resistance, her grand gesture of romantic reconciliation, arrived on Friday afternoon in the form of a delivery to Marcus's apartment. I was sitting on his couch, doing physical therapy exercises that were about as fun as they sounded, when his intercom buzzed. Delivery for. The voice paused, apparently trying to decipher some handwriting. For the guy recovering from the car accident? Marcus and I looked at each other with the kind of mutual confusion you get when reality decides to throw you a curveball. He went downstairs and came back 5 minutes later carrying something that made me question whether I was having some kind of medication-induced hallucination. It was a bouquet. Sort of, if you squinted, and had a very generous definition of what constituted floral arrangement. The flowers, and I use that term loosely, were stuffed inside a small garbage can. An actual, honest-to-God trash can, the kind you'd buy at Target for $15 when you were furnishing your first apartment and had no money for anything decent. Dude, Marcus said, holding the thing at arm's length like it might explode. This is either the most insulting gift in human history or your wife has completely lost her mind. Taped to the side of the garbage can was an envelope with my name written in Clara's flowery handwriting. Inside was a card. One of those generic, thinking of you cards you grab at the last minute from the drugstore, with a message that made me wonder if Clara had suffered some kind of head injury that affected her understanding of symbolism and basic human decency. Like trash, our past can be thrown away so something new can grow. She'd written in that same flowery script. Please let's start again. I promise to be the wife you deserve. Love always, Clara. P.S. I know you'll understand the symbolism. The symbolism. Clara thought she was being profound, sending me flowers in a trash can with a note about throwing away the past. Clara, who had literally thrown away our marriage while I was unconscious in a hospital bed, thought a garbage can full of wilted carnations was the perfect metaphor for our fresh start. But wait, it got better. Tucked inside the card, taped to the bottom like some kind of bizarre bonus prize, was a ring. Not our wedding ring. That was apparently still on her finger in all her Instagram photos with Adrian. This was a different ring, a cheap piece of costume jewelry that looked like it had come from one of those mall kiosks that sold genuine diamonds for $19.99 plus tax. Engraved on the inside, in letters so small I had to squint to read them, was a date, July 14th. July 14th. I stared at those numbers for a solid minute, trying to figure out what was significant about that date. It wasn't our anniversary, that was in October. It wasn't our first date, or the day we moved in together, or any other milestone from our relationship. And then it hit me. July 14th was Adrian's birthday. I knew because Clara had made a big deal about it 6 months ago, insisting we had to send him a card because they were such good friends, and she didn't want him to feel forgotten. I thought it was weird at the time, but I'd gone along with it because that's what I did. I went along with Clara's weird requests because I thought that's what love looked like. Clara had sent me a ring with her boyfriend's birthday engraved on it, as a symbol of our fresh start. She'd literally given me jewelry commemorating the man she'd left me for, apparently without realizing what she'd done. I started laughing. I couldn't help it. It was so spectacularly tone-deaf, so completely oblivious, so perfectly Clara, that I couldn't do anything except laugh until my ribs hurt and Marcus started looking at me like I might need medical attention. "What's so funny?" he asked, taking the ring and holding it up to the light. "Check the date." I managed between fits of laughter. Marcus squinted at the engraving, then looked at me with the kind of expression you'd wear if you'd just witnessed someone try to put their shoes on their hands. "Is this Adrian's birthday?" I confirmed. She gave me a ring with her boyfriend's birthday on it, as a symbol of our new beginning. Marcus stared at the ring for another long moment, then looked at the garbage can full of dying flowers, then back at me. Your wife is completely insane, he said finally. Ex-wife? I corrected, pulling out my phone. Or she will be soon. I took a picture of the whole setup, the trash can, the flowers, the card, the ring, and typed out a text message to Clara. Short, sweet, and to the point. The trash can is exactly where we belong. Then I blocked her number, tossed the ring back into the garbage can where it belonged, and asked Marcus if he wanted to grab dinner somewhere that didn't serve their food in actual trash receptacles. Some grand gestures are romantic. Some are touching. Some make you fall in love all over again. And some make you realize that the person you married is so fundamentally disconnected from reality that they think sending their hospitalized husband a ring commemorating their boyfriend's birthday is the key to winning him back. Clara's grand gesture fell firmly into the last category, and honestly, I couldn't have asked for a better goodbye gift. She'd managed to summarize our entire relationship in one perfectly awful package. Thoughtless, tone-deaf, and completely missing the point. The trash can was exactly where we belonged. The difference was, I was finally ready to take myself out of it. You know what they say about watching a train wreck? You can't look away, even when you know it's going to be ugly. Clara's complete meltdown was like that, except instead of feeling horrified, I felt the kind of satisfied vindication you get when someone who's been cheating at board games finally gets caught and has to face the consequences. The first sign that Clara's world was imploding came through Marcus, who'd been monitoring her social media like it was his job. He'd made himself useful as my personal intelligence gatherer, keeping tabs on Clara's digital breakdown while I focused on more important things like learning to walk without wincing and figuring out what the hell I was going to do with the rest of my life. Dude, Marcus said, bursting into his own living room like he'd just discovered fire. You need to see this. He shoved his phone in my face, Clara's Instagram story filling the screen. Gone were the carefully curated photos of expensive dinners and romantic moments with Adrian. Instead, there was a blurry, shaky video of Clara sitting in what looked like her childhood bedroom, mascara streaking down her face like some kind of Halloween makeup gone wrong. This is what happens when you try to destroy someone's life out of spite, she was saying to the camera, her voice thick with tears and what sounded like a fair amount of wine. When you're so bitter and vindictive that you can't stand to see your ex-wife happy. Some people are just toxic, and you have to protect yourself from their negative energy. Toxic. Clara, who'd celebrated my hospitalization on social media while borrowing money from her family under false pretenses, was calling me toxic for refusing to take her back after her grand gesture with the garbage can flowers. It gets better, Marcus said, swiping to the next story. This one was a screenshot of a text conversation, presumably between Clara and Adrian, though she'd been smart enough to blur out his contact info. What wasn't blurred was his message. I think we should take a break. This whole situation is too messy for me right now. Adrian was bailing. Prince Charming had apparently decided that dating someone whose life was falling apart in real time wasn't as appealing as he'd thought it would be. Shocking, really, that a guy who'd been willing to hook up with a married woman might not be the most stand-up character when things got complicated. The stories kept coming over the next few days, each one more unhinged than the last. Clara ranting about unfair treatment, about people not understanding her side of the story, about how she was the real victim in all of this. She posted motivational quotes about overcoming adversity that were clearly meant to paint her as some kind of warrior battling against injustice, rather than someone facing the consequences of her own spectacularly bad decisions. But the social media meltdown was just the opening act. The main event came when Clara decided to crowdsource her recovery. Holy shit, Marcus said, reading from his laptop screen. She started a GoFundMe. I was doing physical therapy exercises on his living room floor, trying to rebuild the muscle strength in my leg, while simultaneously rebuilding my entire life, when he delivered this latest update on Clara's descent into madness. What's it for? I asked, though I had a feeling I already knew. Husband threw me out, stole my money, Marcus read, his voice taking on the dramatic tone people use when they're reading particularly ridiculous news headlines. Help me get back on my feet after financial abuse. Financial abuse. Clara had started a crowdfunding campaign, claiming I'd financially abused her. The woman who hadn't paid rent in over a year, who'd borrowed thousands from her family while claiming I was a deadbeat, who'd celebrated my hospitalization while planning her escape to a more expensive lifestyle with her ex-boyfriend, was asking strangers on the internet to donate money because I'd supposedly stolen from her. The campaign description was a masterpiece of creative writing, painting Clara as a brave survivor who'd finally escaped from an abusive marriage only to discover that her evil husband had destroyed all her belongings and emptied their joint accounts out of spite. Never mind that we'd never had joint accounts because Clara's credit was so bad that banks wouldn't let her have a checking account without a cosigner. She's asking for $15,000. Marcus continued, scrolling through the page. Says she needs money for a security deposit on a new apartment, basic necessities, and therapy to recover from the trauma I put her through. Therapy to recover from trauma. Clara needed therapy. All right, but not for the reasons she was advertising to potential donors. How much has she raised? I asked, genuinely curious to see if anyone was buying this particular brand of fiction. $63, Marcus said, grinning. From 2 donors. One of them left a comment asking for proof of the abuse allegations. $63. Out of a $15,000 goal. Apparently, even strangers on the internet could smell bullshit when it was laid on this thick. But Clara's online presence wasn't the only thing falling apart. According to Margaret, who'd been keeping me updated on the family drama with the dedication of someone who discovered she'd been living in a soap opera for years, Clara's real-world situation was deteriorating just as spectacularly. She tried to get into the apartment, Margaret told me during one of our increasingly frequent phone calls. Mr. Franklin called the police. Clara had apparently shown up at my building at 3 in the morning, drunk and demanding that the landlord let her into her apartment. When Mr. Franklin had politely explained that her name wasn't on the lease and she had no legal right to be there, she'd started screaming about theft and abuse loud enough to wake half the building. The police ran her information, Margaret continued, her voice tight with embarrassment. She had unpaid tickets. A lot of them. And apparently there was a warrant for missing a court date about driving with a suspended license. Clara had been arrested. Right there in the lobby of my apartment building, in front of half the tenants and probably at least one person with a smartphone who was definitely going to post about it on social media. The woman who'd been so concerned with her public image that she'd crafted an entire false narrative about our marriage had been hauled away in handcuffs for unpaid parking tickets and driving violations. Her father won't bail her out, Margaret added. Neither will her sister. They're all still processing everything you told me about the money she borrowed. Clara was sitting in county lockup because she'd blown through her family's goodwill as thoroughly as she'd blown through their money. The people who'd spent years enabling her behavior, making excuses for her choices, and funding her lifestyle had finally reached their limit. What about Adrian? I asked, because I was genuinely curious whether Prince Charming would step up now that his lady love was experiencing some genuine adversity. Margaret's laugh was bitter. He blocked her on everything. Social media, phone, email. Apparently, dating a married woman is exciting right up until she gets arrested for stalking her ex-husband. The GoFundMe got reported and taken down within 48 hours. Too many people had flagged it as fraudulent, probably after doing the kind of basic fact-checking that Clara had been counting on nobody bothering with. Her social media accounts went quiet after that, presumably because it's hard to maintain your online presence when you're dealing with court dates and trying to figure out how to pay for a lawyer with $63 in crowd-funded sympathy money. But the silence didn't last long. A week later, Clara was back online with a vengeance, posting increasingly desperate and unhinged content about injustice and persecution. She'd apparently decided that the best way to handle her situation was to double down on the victim narrative, posting long, rambling captions about how society failed women who tried to escape abusive relationships. Her friends started distancing themselves. The same people who'd commented, "Good for you, girl," on her original celebration post were noticeably absent from her recent content. Turns out, supporting someone's empowerment journey is a lot more appealing when it doesn't involve felony charges and public meltdowns. She called me last night, Margaret said during our latest update call, crying, begging me to help her. She said she'd learned her lesson, that she was ready to change, that she just needed one more chance to get her life together. What did you tell her? I told her that learning lessons involves facing consequences, not finding new ways to avoid them. I told her that if she wants to get her life together, she needs to do it without other people's money and other people's excuses. Margaret had finally found her backbone, and Clara was discovering what life looked like when you couldn't manipulate the people around you into cleaning up your messes. It was ugly, messy, and entirely self-inflicted, but it was also completely deserved. Clara's world hadn't just collapsed. It had imploded with the spectacular efficiency of a building demolished by professionals. Job gone, boyfriend gone, family support gone, public reputation destroyed, and facing legal consequences for the first time in her adult life. And the best part? I hadn't had to do anything except stop enabling her. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply step back and let someone face the natural consequences of their choices without trying to save them from themselves. Clara had spent years building a house of cards made from lies, manipulation, and other people's money. All it had taken was one strong wind to bring the whole thing crashing down. 6 months later, I was sitting on the balcony of my new apartment, watering the herb garden I'd finally had space to plant. Basil, rosemary, thyme, simple things that grew when you actually took care of them. My leg had healed better than expected, and I'd named my used Honda Liberty because apparently near-death experiences make you sentimental about independence. Therapy had been worth every penny. Turns out, staying with someone because you're afraid of being alone isn't love. It's codependency with better marketing. I'd spent 5 years trying to fix Clara when I should have been asking why I thought broken people were my responsibility. Margaret had surprised me with a final visit, bringing a check for $2,000. "I'm sorry," she'd said simply. I enabled her behavior by always bailing her out. "This is for your fresh start." Her daughter was working at a diner now, living in a studio apartment, still convinced the world owed her better. I didn't feel vindictive anymore. I felt free. Clara had taught me exactly what I didn't want in a partner, and for that lesson, expensive as it was, I was almost grateful. Almost. Liberty purred to life as I headed to work, windows down, no one to answer to but myself. Sometimes the best revenge is just living well. On my 40th birthday, I stood frozen as cranberry juice dripped down my $5,000 dress. My wife's sister smirked. "Now you look as cheap as you really are." My wife's mom clapped. My wife washed with pride. But none of them knew. This night would be the turning point. Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Turning 40 hit different. Not in that, "oh no, I'm old" kind of way that makes middle-aged dudes buy sports cars and start dating women who still think TikTok is a career path. Nah. For me, it was more like standing at a crossroads where one sign said, "keep being a doormat," and the other said, "grow a spine, dumbass." Guess which direction I've been walking for the past decade? If you guessed doormat, congratulations, you're smarter than I was. So there I stood, on what was supposed to be my night, my big 4-0 celebration, in Seattle's swankiest restaurant, the Azure Room. And when I say swanky, I mean the kind of place where they describe water like it's a fine wine and charge you $30 for it. Spring-fed from the glaciers of Iceland. They'll say with a straight face while you're just sitting there thinking, "Bro, it's water." But whatever, I'd rented out their entire private hall, because apparently that's what you do when you're desperately trying to prove to your wife's vulture family that you're not some charity case who got lucky. The place looked like something out of a magazine spread. You know, the kind that makes normal people feel inadequate about their IKEA furniture. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like expensive tears. Tables were draped in fabric that probably cost more per yard than my first car. And there was an actual string quartet in the corner playing Vivaldi like we were at some aristocratic ball in 1780s Vienna instead of downtown Seattle, where it rains 9 months out of the year and everyone's perpetually caffeinated. I dropped serious cash on this shindig. We're talking imported champagne that came with its own certificate of authenticity because apparently grapes need resumes now. A 5-course tasting menu designed by a chef whose ego was bigger than his Michelin stars. And those little gold leaf appetizers that taste like bankruptcy, but look Instagram-worthy. All because I needed, to show them. Show Sophia's mom that I wasn't the budget option she thought her daughter settled for. Show her sister that I had more going on than a decent credit score. Show everyone that Marcus Bennett wasn't just some guy who happened to marry into their precious family tree. And yeah, about that suit. My custom Tom Ford midnight blue number that I'd been calling my $5,000 dress, as a joke, because it genuinely cost more than Sophia's wedding gown. The tailor had taken my measurements like he was sculpting Michelangelo's David, going on about drape and shoulder construction, while I nodded along pretending I understood the difference between notched and peak lapels. But I'll be damned if I didn't look good in it. The kind of good where waiters called you sir, with actual respect instead of that passive-aggressive service industry tone that really means hurry up and tip me. Cheapskate. The night started out promising, honestly. My real friends showed up, people I'd known since college, business partners who actually respected me, Reggie with his big mouth and bigger heart. They were punctual, warm, brought thoughtful gifts that weren't just hastily grabbed gift cards from the Walgreens down the street. We were laughing, the champagne was flowing, and for a hot minute I thought maybe, just maybe, this would be the birthday where everything clicked into place. Then at 7:30, a full hour and a half late, because apparently time is just a suggestion when you're as self-important as my in-laws, they made their grand entrance. And I do mean grand. Judith, my mother-in-law, walked in like she was expecting a red carpet and paparazzi, wearing some designer outfit that screamed, I have opinions about your life choices. Zara, the sister-in-law from hell, strutted behind her wearing sunglasses indoors like she was hiding from fame she didn't have, her phone already out recording what I can only assume was riveting content for her 3,000 followers, 2,847 of which were definitely bots she'd bought during a wine-drunk online shopping spree. And then there was Sophia, my wife, the woman I'd pledged my life to in front of 200 guests and a priest who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. She looked absolutely stunning in this velvet dress that hugged every curve, her dark hair perfectly styled, makeup flawless. The kind of beautiful that makes you forget for a second that beauty can be a really expensive package deal that comes with toxic in-laws and a monthly subscription fee to drama. No apologies for being late, naturally. Judith just waved her hand dismissively, like she was swatting away the concept of basic courtesy. Traffic was absolutely dreadful, Marcus, and Zara's lashes needed extra glue. You understand. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. A decree from on high that their time was simply more valuable than everyone else's. I smiled that smile I'd perfected over 10 years of marriage, the one that said, I'm unbothered, while internally I was calculating exactly how much this disrespect was costing me per minute. Of course, I said smoothly. Priorities before punctuality. After all, what's a birthday without properly glued lashes? The waiter who'd been standing nearby actually had to turn away to hide his smirk. At least someone appreciated my sarcasm. They sat down at the head table I'd specifically reserved for family, immediately ordering the most expensive items on the menu without so much as glancing at the prices. Why would they? It wasn't their credit card getting demolished. Zara ordered 3 appetizers just to try, which really meant she'd take one bite of each for the aesthetic and leave the rest. Judith asked if the chef could make something off-menu, because apparently the carefully curated 5-course meal wasn't good enough. And Sophia? She just smiled at me like this was all perfectly normal behavior, like I should be grateful they'd even showed up. The evening proceeded exactly as I should have predicted if I'd had even half a functioning brain cell. My friends made genuine toasts about our college days, about building my business from the ground up, about the actual substance of who I was as a person. Reggie stood up with his wine glass, grinning like the goofball he is, and said, to Marcus, living proof that good guys don't finish last, they just buy the whole damn restaurant. Everyone laughed, clinked glasses, and for a moment it felt real. Then Judith raised her glass with all the enthusiasm of someone being forced to acknowledge a parking meter. To Marcus, she said with that smile that never reached her eyes, our dependable man who's always around. The pause before around was deliberate, weighted with all the subtle disdain she'd cultivated over a decade of tolerating my existence in her daughter's life. Zara, never one to miss an opportunity to twist the knife, added with a giggle, and always paying. The table erupted in laughter. Their table, anyway. My friends shifted uncomfortably, suddenly very interested in their salmon courses. I kept smiling. That same practice smile that was becoming my default setting around these people. Inside I was doing math. Calculating interest on 10 years of patience, compound humiliation, the emotional toll of being treated like a walking wallet with arms. The numbers were adding up to something significant. Dessert arrived. This elaborate chocolate sculpture with Happy 40th Marcus, written in actual gold leaf because apparently regular frosting is for peasants. It was ridiculous and over the top, and I'd specifically requested it because I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd see the effort and appreciate it. Shows what I knew. I barely had time to admire the sugar craftsmanship before I noticed Zara leaning over to Sophia, whispering something with this wicked little smirk on her face. They both giggled like middle school mean girls who'd just come up with the world's most devastating insult. Then Zara picked up her cranberry mocktail, because of course she doesn't drink alcohol. She's cleansing, or whatever the current wellness trend dictates. And I watched in slow motion as she raised it, tilted it, and dumped the entire glass directly onto my chest. The cold liquid hit me like a shock, spreading across that expensive midnight blue fabric in an expanding stain that looked like I'd been shot in a really fruity assassination attempt. The table went silent. Everyone froze. And then Zara, with the confidence of someone who'd never faced consequences for anything in her entire privileged life, sneered. "Now you look as cheap as you really are." Judith actually clapped. Like applause. Like her daughter had just performed a piano recital instead of committing assault with a beverage. And Sophia, my wife, my partner, the person who was supposed to have my back, just watched with this expression of pride that made my stomach turn. The restaurant staff looked horrified. My friends looked ready to throw hands. Reggie was already halfway out of his seat. But me? I just calmly picked up my napkin, dabbed at the spreading stain with careful precision, and said in the most even tone I could manage, "Good thing it's stain-resistant." Unlike my patience. The laugh I got from my side of the table was genuine. The silence from theirs was deafening. And in that moment, watching cranberry juice drip onto my Italian leather shoes, I felt something shift inside my chest. Not anger exactly, though that was definitely brewing. Not even hurt, though yeah, that was there too. It was clarity. Cold, sharp, absolute clarity. This night wasn't the humiliation they thought it was. This wasn't another story they'd tell at their family brunches about how they keep Marcus humble, or whatever justification they'd spin. This was documentation. Evidence. The final straw that I'd needed to stop being a doormat and start being the kind of man who actually valued himself. That night, my friends, was the turning point. They just didn't know it yet. Hell, I barely knew it yet. But as I sat there with cranberry juice soaking through my $5,000 suit, watching my wife's family laugh like this was peak comedy, something fundamental changed in me. The old Marcus would have laughed it off, paid the cleaning bill, and moved on like it was just another Tuesday in the Bennett household. But the new Marcus? The one being born right there in that moment with fruit juice dripping down his chest? He was already planning. Because here's the thing about being underestimated. It gives you one hell of an advantage. Let me rewind the tape a bit, because you're probably wondering how the hell I ended up married into a family that treats me like a human ATM with premium processing fees. Fair question. Trust me, I ask myself the same thing at least 3 times a week, usually while lying awake at 3 in the morning questioning every life decision I've made since puberty. 10 years ago, I met Sophia at a tech conference in San Francisco, which sounds boring as hell, but stick with me here. I was 29, hungry, and riding the high of my consulting firm's first major contract with a Fortune 500 company. She was 27, working in luxury brand management, which I later learned was code for I tell rich people what to buy and take a commission. And she had this magnetic energy that made everyone in the room gravitate toward her like she was the sun, and we were all just planets desperate for warmth. She was smart, I'll give her that. Scary smart. The kind of woman who could calculate a tip faster than a calculator and remember the names of every person she'd ever met at a networking event. She quoted philosophy over cocktails, had opinions on wine regions I'd never heard of, and made me feel like I was the most interesting person in the room, even though I was just a tech nerd who got excited about cybersecurity protocols. Looking back, I think that was the hook. She made me feel seen in a way I'd never experienced before. Our first date was at this hole-in-the-wall Italian place in North Beach where the pasta was handmade and the wine came in mason jars. She laughed at my terrible jokes, touched my arm when she talked, and by the end of the night, I was completely gone. Like writing poetry in my head gone, which is embarrassing to admit, but there it is. 3 months later, we were exclusive. 6 months after that, I met her family. That should have been my first red flag the size of a football field. We drove up to Judith's house in Bellevue. And when I say house, I mean a sprawling colonial monstrosity with columns out front like she was cosplaying as a southern plantation owner in the Pacific Northwest. The lawn was so perfectly manicured it looked fake, like someone had installed AstroTurf but charged luxury grass prices. There was a fountain in the circular driveway, an actual fountain with cherubs and everything. I remember thinking, oh, so this is where Sophia gets her taste for expensive things. Judith answered the door in pearls. At 2 in the afternoon. On a Saturday. Who wears pearls to a casual family lunch? Apparently, people who need you to know they have money and you don't. She looked me up and down like I was a used car she was considering whether to buy, and I swear I saw her nose wrinkle slightly when she noticed my off-the-rack blazer from Nordstrom Rack. So you must be Marcus, she said, extending her hand limply like she expected me to kiss it instead of shake it. Sophia has told me so much about you. The emphasis on so much made it clear that exactly none of what she'd heard had impressed her. I shook her hand firmly anyway because my dad raised me right, smiled my best, meeting the parents' smile, and said, all good things, I hope. She didn't answer, just turned on her heel and led us into a living room that looked like it had been decorated by someone who'd never heard of the concept of comfort. Everything was white or cream or beige, the kind of color palette that screams, we don't actually live here, we just pose for catalog photos. There were decorative pillows on the couch that were clearly never meant to be used for actual pillow purposes, and I'm pretty sure the coffee table books had never been opened. That's when I met Zara. She was sprawled across an armchair with her phone in her face, scrolling through Instagram with the kind of focus most people reserve for important tasks like defusing bombs or performing surgery. She was 23 at the time, fresh out of college with a degree in communications that she'd somehow turned into a career of taking selfies and calling herself an influencer. Her bio said, lifestyle curator and wellness advocate, which as far as I could tell meant she took pictures of herself drinking green smoothies and occasionally posted inspirational quotes she'd stolen from actually successful people. Zara, we have a guest, Judith said with this weird sing-song voice that made my skin crawl. Zara looked up, gave me the same evaluating once-over her mother had, and said, oh, hi. Then she immediately went back to her phone. That was it. That was the entire introduction. No handshake, no questions about who I was or what I did, just a dismissive, oh hi, like I was a piece of furniture someone had just delivered. Lunch was uncomfortable in that special way that only meeting your girlfriend's family for the first time can be. Every question felt loaded. Every answer I gave seemed to disappoint them in new and creative ways. Judith asked what I did for work, and when I explained that I ran a tech consulting firm specializing in cybersecurity and digital infrastructure for mid to large-sized companies, she smiled this tight smile and said, oh, how nice. So you fix computers? Not exactly, I tried to explain. We help companies build secure networks, protect against cyber threats, implement cloud solutions, stuff like that. More consulting than repair work. She nodded like she was listening, but I could tell she'd already categorized me under tech support guy in her mental filing system, and nothing I said was going to change that. And is that profitable? She asked, which is just a polite rich person way of asking, are you poor? Before I could answer, Zara piped up without looking up from her phone. Mom, can you Venmo me for the Sephora order? The spring collection just dropped, and I need to get it before it sells out. Judith immediately pulled out her phone. Of course, darling. How much? Like $300? Maybe $350. And just like that, $350 got transferred for makeup while I sat there having my career credentials questioned. The irony wasn't lost on me, though apparently it was lost on everyone else at that table. Sophia squeezed my hand under the table, gave me this apologetic look that said, just bear with them. And I did because I was in love and stupid and convinced that family dynamics would improve once they got to know me better. Spoiler alert, they didn't. The rest of lunch was more of the same. Judith asking invasive questions about my family background. Disappointed to learn my parents were middle-class public school teachers in Michigan, not business moguls or old money aristocrats. Zara occasionally interjecting with requests for money that Judith fulfilled without question. And Sophia playing mediator, laughing at her family's little jabs like they were jokes instead of judgments. By the time we left, I felt like I'd been through a job interview where I'd failed every question. In the car, Sophia assured me it went great. They loved you, she said, which even then I knew was a lie. Mom can be a bit particular, but she'll warm up to you. 10 years later, I'm still waiting for that warmth. What I got instead was a nickname, the budget husband. Yeah, you read that right. That's actually what they called me behind my back, and sometimes to my face when they thought they were being cute. Zara started it about a year into my relationship with Sophia, posting some stupid meme on her Instagram story about, when your sister dates down, but at least he's financially stable, with a string of laughing emojis. Sophia thought it was hilarious. I thought it was degrading, but I laughed along because that's what you do when you're trying to fit into a family that's made it clear you don't belong. You laugh at jokes at your own expense and pretend it doesn't chip away at your self-respect piece by piece. The worst part? Judith actually said it to my face once at a family dinner. We were at some overpriced restaurant in downtown Seattle because apparently the Lee family doesn't eat anywhere that doesn't require reservations and valet parking, and the waiter brought the check. Without even looking at it, without even pretending to reach for her purse, Judith slid it across the table to me and said with this smile, "This is why Sophia married the budget husband. Always so dependable." Everyone laughed, even Sophia. And I sat there with that damn leather bill holder in my hands, looking at a total that could have fed a small country, and smiled like it was the funniest thing I'd ever heard. Then I paid, because that's what I always did. That's what they expected. Over the years, I became their go-to bank. Need a girls' trip to Miami? Call Marcus. Want to upgrade your kitchen appliances to commercial-grade equipment you'll never actually use? Marcus has got you covered. Starting a boutique business that'll fail within 2 years, but sounds impressive at book club? Better hit up good, old, reliable Marcus. Zara's self-care retreats became a quarterly expense on my credit card. These weren't actual wellness retreats with meditation and yoga and finding yourself, or whatever. These were just regular vacations to expensive resorts where she'd take 1,000 photos in different bikinis, post them with captions about investing in herself, and rack up bar tabs that made my accountant send concerned emails with subject lines like, "We need to talk about your spending." Every time, Zara would promise to pay me back. "I'm getting a brand deal soon," she'd say. "This company wants to sponsor me. They're just finalizing the contract." The contract never materialized. The money never came back. But the requests kept coming, regular as clockwork, and I kept saying yes because Sophia would ask me to help out family, and I was too in love or too stupid to see the pattern. Judith was somehow even worse. She'd call with these emergencies that weren't actually emergencies but required immediate financial intervention. Her refrigerator broke, except it didn't break. She just wanted a smart fridge with a screen and ice maker that could crush ice in 17 different sizes. Her roof was leaking, except the leak was minor and the quote she got was for a complete roof replacement with solar panels. Every problem was an opportunity for an upgrade, and every upgrade was funded by the Bank of Marcus. The boutique, though, that was Sophia's dream, and I was genuinely supportive of it at first. She wanted to open a high-end fashion boutique in Capitol Hill featuring curated sustainable luxury brands, which sounded impressive until you realized it meant she'd buy expensive clothes from other designers, mark them up even more, and sell them to Seattle's wealthy elite who had more money than sense. I invested everything she asked for. Storefront lease in a prime location? Check. Interior designer to make it look like a minimalist fever dream? Done. Inventory from European brands that shipped via private courier because apparently regular shipping wasn't exclusive enough? You got it. Marketing budget for a launch party that cost more than most people's weddings? Of course. The boutique opened with champagne and influencers and local press coverage. Sophia was radiant, thanking everyone who'd supported her vision. She gave speeches about female entrepreneurship and following your dreams and building something from nothing. Everyone applauded. What she didn't mention was that the nothing she'd built it from was actually my bank account, or that my name was on exactly none of the business documents despite funding the entire operation. When I brought it up later, she kissed my cheek and said, "You know I couldn't have done this without you, baby. You're my partner." But when I suggested actually being a partner, like, legally, with my name on something, she got weird about it. Said it would complicate the business structure, that her brand identity needed to be independent, that I wouldn't understand the fashion world's dynamics. So I let it go, added it to the growing list of things I let go. And that list, my friends, was getting longer than a CVS receipt. So yeah, let me formally introduce myself since we're already deep into this disaster of a story, and you probably deserve to know exactly who's been bankrolling this circus. I'm Marcus Bennett, 40 years old as of that magical cranberry-soaked evening, and I run a tech consulting firm called Bennett Solutions that somehow managed to survive and thrive despite my personal life being an absolute dumpster fire. My parents would be proud of the business part, at least. The marriage part? That's a conversation I've been avoiding during our bi-weekly phone calls for about 3 years now. I grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is a perfectly nice college town where people are more concerned about football rankings than fashion labels, and where a fancy dinner means going to the Olive Garden on a Friday night. My dad taught high school math. My mom taught elementary school, and they both believed in this quaint old-fashioned concept called living within your means. Revolutionary, I know. They saved up for vacations, drove their cars until the wheels literally fell off, and taught me that money was something you earned through actual work, not something you just expected to appear because you existed and looked good in photographs. I was the kid who built computers in the basement, who got excited about coding languages the way other kids got excited about sports, who spent Saturday nights debugging programs instead of going to parties. Yeah, I was that nerd. Still am, honestly, except now I wear expensive suits and have a corner office with a view of Puget Sound, so at least I'm a successful nerd. My company specializes in cybersecurity consulting, which means businesses pay us obscene amounts of money to tell them their security sucks and then fix it before some teenager in Romania steals all their customer data and posts it on the dark web. When I started Bennett Solutions 12 years ago, it was literally just me in a cramped apartment in Fremont, surviving on ramen and ambition, cold calling companies, and pitching my services like my life depended on it. Because it did. I had student loans the size of a mortgage, a laptop held together with duct tape and prayers, and exactly $700 in my bank account. But I also had something those rich kids with their trust funds and connections didn't have. I was hungry. Not metaphorically hungry, though there was plenty of that too. I mean genuinely willing to outwork everyone else, because failure wasn't an option when you came from a middle-class background where safety nets were made of hope and determination instead of family money. The business grew slowly at first, then exponentially once I landed a contract with a major healthcare provider who'd been hacked and needed someone to rebuild their entire infrastructure from scratch. That job led to referrals, which led to more contracts, which led to hiring actual employees instead of being a one-man show operating out of my living room. By the time I met Sophia, I had 15 employees, an actual office space, and enough money in the bank to feel like I'd made it. Here's the thing about finally having money after growing up without it. You don't really know how to handle it at first. You're generous to a fault because you remember what it felt like to stress about every dollar. You pick up checks because you can and because it feels good to be the provider, the dependable one, the guy who's got it covered. You don't think about boundaries or limits or the fact that some people will see your generosity as an ATM they can withdraw from whenever they feel like it. That was me, Marcus Bennett, the guy with the patience of a saint and the wallet of a small nation, as I so eloquently put it earlier. Though honestly, calling myself a small nation is probably underselling it. More like a medium-sized nation with robust GDP and a concerning trade deficit with the Lee family. Let me break down the financial devastation in numbers that would make my accountant, Derek. Shout out to Derek, the only person who's been consistently honest with me about this mess, have a panic attack. Over the course of my 10-year marriage to Sophia, I'd become the primary funding source for what I can only describe as the Lee Family Welfare Program. Zara's self-care retreats happened 4 times a year like clockwork. Miami in March, Tulum in June, Ibiza in September, and Bali in December because apparently, self-care is a full-time job that requires international travel and business class flights. Each trip averaged around $8,000 when you factored in the resort, the spa treatments, the restaurants where she'd order the most expensive thing on the menu and take exactly 3 bites for Instagram, and the shopping because you can't go to a new country without bringing back authentic local pieces that were probably made in the same Chinese factory as everything else. That's $32,000 a year just for Zara to take pictures of herself in designer swimwear. But wait, there's more. Because Zara also needed a new car every 2 years, leased, naturally. Because why own something when you can have perpetual monthly payments? Which I co-signed for because her credit was apparently in the toilet from all those brand deals that never materialized into actual income. Add another $600 a month, or $7,200 annually, to the Zara tab. Then there were the random emergency requests that popped up with alarming frequency. Her laptop broke. $1,500 for a new MacBook Pro because she needed the processing power for her content creation, which consisted of phone selfies and 2-sentence captions. Her apartment needed new furniture. $4,000 at West Elm because IKEA wasn't on brand for her aesthetic. She needed a new camera for better quality photos. $3,000 for equipment she used exactly twice before deciding her iPhone was actually superior. Emergency dental work because she'd been putting off a root canal. $2,500 that I paid directly to the dentist because I knew if I gave her the cash it would somehow end up spent on a weekend in Vegas. Conservative estimate for Zara's annual financial drain? About $50,000. $50,000. For someone who was supposedly an independent adult with her own career and income stream. I could have bought a Tesla every year with what I spent on my sister-in-law's lifestyle maintenance. Now let's talk about Judith, the matriarch of this financial disaster. Her requests were somehow even more audacious because they came wrapped in this veneer of propriety and necessity that made them harder to refuse. She didn't ask for handouts. Oh no, that would be undignified. She asked for loans that we both knew would never be repaid, or she mentioned unfortunate circumstances that required immediate assistance, or she simply made statements about her needs that Sophia would then translate into requests on her behalf. The Great Refrigerator Incident of 2022 cost me $8,000. $8,000 for a refrigerator that could probably achieve sentience and solve world hunger. It had a screen, multiple temperature zones, a camera inside so you could see your food while grocery shopping, and a price tag that made me question my entire existence. When I suggested maybe she could just replace her existing fridge with a regular new model, Judith looked at me like I'd suggested she wear sweatpants to the opera. The roof situation was even better. $23,000 for a roof that didn't actually need replacing, but since we were already dealing with it, we might as well upgrade to architectural shingles and add solar panels because property value and environmental consciousness and a dozen other justifications that boiled down to, I want it and Marcus will pay for it. The kicker? It was for a house that Sophia and I didn't even live in and would never inherit because Judith had made it very clear that everything was going to Zara when she passed since Sophia had married well and wouldn't need the help. There were property taxes when Judith forgot to pay them, $6,000. There was the new HVAC system because the old one was inefficient, $12,000. There was landscaping redesign because the yard needed to be modernized, $9,000 for plants and stones, and a Japanese-inspired water feature that looked like someone had watched too many Zen garden videos on YouTube. Every few months, something new would come up, some new expense that somehow became my responsibility. Judith's annual impact on my bank account? North of $60,000, easy. And unlike Zara, who at least had the decency to ask me directly, Judith worked through Sophia, which meant every request came with emotional manipulation baked in. Mom's really struggling, Sophia would say, about a woman who had a paid-off house, a Mercedes, and a wine collection worth more than most people's retirement funds. She's too proud to ask, but I know she needs help. And I, being the dutiful husband who didn't want to be the bad guy who refused to help his wife's family, would write another check. But the real money pit, the crown jewel of financial disasters, was Sophia's boutique. Bell and Briar. Yes, she named it something that sounded like a character from a fairy tale, because subtlety has never been the Lee family's strong suit. The initial investment was $120,000. Let me repeat that. $120,000 to open a retail store in one of the most expensive neighborhoods in Seattle, in an era when everyone does their shopping online, to sell clothes that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The breakdown went something like this. $40,000 for the lease deposit and first 3 months of rent in Capitol Hill, where retail space goes for about $8,000 a month, because apparently location is everything. $30,000 for interior design and renovations because the space needed to have the right energy and reflect the brand aesthetic, which meant exposed brick, minimalist clothing racks that looked like modern art installations, and a seating area with a velvet couch where exactly no one would ever sit. $25,000 for initial inventory from European designers whose names I couldn't pronounce and whose clothes looked like they'd been designed by someone who'd never actually seen a human body. $15,000 for the launch party that included champagne, catering, a live DJ, and gift bags for influencers that probably cost more than the gifts inside. And another $10,000 for the marketing campaign that included professional photography, social media advertising, and paying a PR firm to get mentions in local fashion blogs. That was just the startup cost. The ongoing expenses were their own special nightmare. Rent at $8,000 a month. 2 employees at $15 an hour each because apparently Sophia couldn't actually be bothered to work her own store full-time. She needed to be available for creative direction and brand partnerships. Monthly inventory replenishment. Utilities. Insurance. Marketing. Website maintenance. Every month, that boutique needed cash flow, and every month it operated at a loss that I covered because Sophia insisted it just needed time to find its audience. In 2 years of operation, Bell & Breyer had made a grand total of $83,000 in revenue and cost me over $300,000 when you added up everything. That's not a business. That's a very expensive hobby that I was apparently funding while watching my retirement plans evaporate into designer clothing and craft coffee for customers who never materialized in the numbers we needed. Here's the really fun part, though. My name wasn't on any of it. Not the business license, not the lease, not the bank accounts. Nothing. When I'd suggested being listed as a co-owner, since I was funding the entire operation, Sophia had gotten weird about it. Said it would complicate things with her brand identity, that investors and customers needed to see it as her vision, that having a man's name on the business would undermine her position as a female entrepreneur. And stupid, in love, Doormat Marcus had said, "Sure, honey, whatever you think is best." So there you have it. The Bank of Marcus. Operating hours, 24/7, 365. Services offered, unlimited withdrawals, no questions asked, no repayment required. Customer satisfaction guaranteed or your dignity back. Except the dignity was non-refundable, and I'd lost that somewhere around year 3 of this arrangement. Every year, Derek would sit me down for our annual financial review, and every year his expression would get progressively more concerned. "Marcus," he'd say, pulling up spreadsheets that looked like crime scene evidence, "we need to talk about your family expenses." And every year I'd wave him off, make jokes about the cost of keeping the peace, and promise to set better boundaries that we both knew I wouldn't actually set. The worst part wasn't even the money, though watching hundreds of thousands of dollars disappear into the void of other people's wants was pretty devastating. The worst part was the lack of appreciation, the entitlement, the assumption that this was just how things were supposed to be. No thank yous, no acknowledgement, no recognition that maybe, just maybe, I was being taken advantage of. Just expectation followed by more expectation, an endless cycle of requests that I kept fulfilling because I didn't know how to say no without being the villain. Turning 40 felt like standing on the edge of something significant, Not in that cliché midlife crisis way where guys suddenly buy Corvettes and start hitting the gym obsessively while listening to the same music they loved in high school. More like a threshold moment where you either accept who you've become or decide to do something about it. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to choose option 2 in the most spectacular way possible. I'd been planning this birthday party for months, which should have been my first clue that I was overcompensating for something. Normal people don't spend months planning their own birthday parties unless they're trying to prove a point, and boy, did I have a point to prove. 10 years of being called the budget husband, a decade of being treated like the help at family gatherings, countless dinner parties where I picked up the check while getting roasted for my quaint middle-class background. All of it was building to this moment where I'd finally show them I wasn't just some lucky schmuck who'd married above his station. The Azure Room wasn't just any restaurant. This place was Seattle royalty, the kind of establishment where tech billionaires took visiting investors and where marriage proposals came with a side of financial anxiety. Getting a reservation normally required booking 3 months in advance and possibly sacrificing your firstborn, but I'd rented the entire private dining hall for the evening, which meant I essentially had the run of the place. The manager, this sophisticated guy named Philippe who pronounced every syllable like it was a fine wine, had personally overseen every detail of my event planning. We're talking about the works here, people. A seven-piece string quartet positioned in the corner, playing everything from Vivaldi to modern covers of pop, and a custom menu designed by a chef who'd trained in Paris and had opinions about the proper way to sear scallops that he'd share whether you asked or not. The champagne alone was a whole thing. I'm talking Krug Classe d'Ambonne, which for those of you who aren't pretentious wine people, and I wasn't until I married into this family, is basically liquid gold that costs about $400 per bottle. I'd ordered 12 bottles because Philippe had assured me that discerning guests appreciate quality over quantity. What he meant was rich people drink expensive booze, and if I wanted to impress them, I needed to pony up. So I did. The whole evening was supposed to cost somewhere in the neighborhood of $40,000 when you added up the venue, food, drinks, entertainment, and all the little extras that Philippe kept suggesting with that smooth European accent that made everything sound necessary. Perhaps some caviar service for arrival? Sure, why not? The chef has prepared a special dessert presentation with gold leaf and French chocolate. Obviously, we could arrange for a private sommelier to pair wines with each course. Of course we could. Reggie, my best friend since college and the closest thing I had to a brother, thought I'd lost my damn mind. We'd met up for lunch about a week before the party at our usual spot, a dive bar near Pike Place Market where the bartender knew our orders and nobody cared if you showed up in jeans and a t-shirt. He'd listened to me describe all the planning, getting progressively more concerned with each detail. Bro, he'd said, setting down his beer and giving me that lawyer look he uses when he thinks someone's making a terrible decision. This is insane. You're dropping the GDP of a small country on a birthday party to impress people who already don't respect you. You see how that's backwards, right? I'd laughed it off, ordered another round, and told him he didn't understand. This isn't about impressing them, I'd insisted, which even I knew was a lie. This is about celebrating a milestone with the people I care about. Marcus, my man, you're one of the smartest people I know when it comes to business. But when it comes to that family, he'd shaken his head. You've got a PhD in being a doormat. He wasn't wrong, but I wasn't ready to hear it yet. Instead, I'd changed the subject and made him promise to give a toast at the party. Make it good, I told him. Something that'll make them see me differently. The night of the party, I'd gotten ready at home, standing in front of the mirror in that midnight blue Tom Ford suit that had cost more than some people's monthly salary. The fabric felt incredible, the fit was perfect, and looking at my reflection, I barely recognized myself. I looked successful, powerful, like someone who belonged in rooms with important people making important decisions. It was exactly the image I'd been trying to project for years. Sophia had come up behind me, wrapping her arms around my waist and smiling at our reflection. You look amazing, she'd said, and for a moment, I'd let myself believe that maybe she was proud of me, that maybe tonight would be different, that maybe her family would finally see what she saw, assuming she actually saw anything beyond my bank account. Think your mom will be impressed? I'd asked, half joking but also desperately serious. She'd kissed my cheek, leaving a lipstick mark I'd had to wipe off. She'll come around eventually. You know how she is. Yeah, I knew exactly how she was. That was the problem. I'd arrived at the Azure Room early, obsessively checking every detail like a general inspecting troops before battle. The flowers were perfect. The music was elegant. The champagne was chilling at exactly the right temperature. Philippe had assured me that everything was impeccable and that my guests would be thoroughly impressed. I'd tipped him an extra $500 just for the confidence boost. My friends started arriving around 6:30, people from work, old college buddies who'd flown in from out of state, my business partner David, who'd helped me build Bennett Solutions from the ground up. They brought thoughtful gifts, offered genuine congratulations, and seemed actually happy to be there celebrating with me. We laughed, shared stories, caught up on life. For those first 30 minutes before the Lee family arrived, I actually enjoyed my own party. Reggie had pulled me aside at one point, handing me a scotch and raising his glass. Tonight's gonna be epic, he'd said with that grin that usually meant he was about to say something wildly inappropriate. This is your night, man. 40 years of being awesome, and everyone here knows it. Everyone except the people who matter most to my wife. I'd muttered into my drink. Then maybe, Reggie had said carefully, the people who matter most to your wife are the wrong people. I'd laughed it off then, but those words would echo in my head later that night, after the cranberry juice incident, after the humiliation, After everything fell apart in exactly the way I should have predicted if I'd been paying attention to the patterns instead of desperately hoping they'd change. But standing there at 6:45, drink in hand, surrounded by people who actually gave a damn about me, I'd felt optimistic. Foolish, naive, stupid optimistic. This was going to be the night everything changed, I told myself. The night I finally earned their respect. Turns out I was half right. Everything was definitely going to change. Just not in the way I'd imagined. 7 o'clock came and went. Then 7:15, 7:20, 7:30. Each time the door opened, I'd look up expecting to see Sophia and her family, and each time it was just more of my actual friends arriving on time, like civilized human beings who understood basic social contracts. Philippe kept glancing at me with this sympathetic expression that made me want to crawl under the ornate serving table and hide from the growing embarrassment of being stood up at my own damn birthday party. My business partner David sidled up next to me around 7:25, champagne in hand, and whispered, "Should we be worried? Did something happen?" The concern in his voice was genuine, which somehow made it worse. He actually thought there might be an emergency. Some legitimate reason why my wife and her family were nearly an hour late to an event that had been planned for months and confirmed repeatedly. "Oh, they're fine," I'd said with a laugh that sounded hollow even to my own ears. Judith probably needed extra time for her makeup, or Zara was having a wardrobe crisis. You know how it is. Except I didn't know how it was, and it had nothing to do with emergencies and everything to do with power dynamics I was only beginning to understand. Being late wasn't an accident for the Lee family. It was a statement, a way of establishing hierarchy, of making it clear that their time was more valuable than everyone else's, that the party couldn't really start until they arrived because they were the main event. I'd seen Judith do it at weddings, at charity galas, at casual dinner parties where she'd show up fashionably late and expect everyone to fawn over her entrance like she was royalty, gracing the peasants with her presence. At 7:35, the door finally opened with this theatrical flourish, and in they came like they were walking a red carpet at the Oscars instead of arriving inexcusably late to a private party. Judith led the procession wearing some designer number that probably cost more than the average person's car payment, all flowing fabric and strategic draping that screamed, "I have money and opinions about your life choices." Her hair was styled within an inch of its life, every strand precisely placed, her makeup flawless in that way that takes professional help and probably 3 different ring lights. Behind her came Zara, and I swear to God this woman was wearing sunglasses. Inside, at 7:30 at night, in Seattle, in October, when it had been dark outside for over an hour, she had her phone out, naturally, recording her entrance for what I can only assume was incredibly riveting content for her followers who definitely cared deeply about her arrival at her brother-in-law's birthday party. She was doing that influencer walk where every step looks choreographed, pausing every few feet to get different angles, completely oblivious to the fact that everyone was staring at her not because she looked amazing, but because she looked absolutely ridiculous. And then there was Sophia, my wife, my partner, the woman who'd promised to be by my side through everything. She looked stunning in a velvet dress that hugged every curve, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders, makeup perfect, jewelry glinting in the chandelier light. She looked like $1,000,000, which was ironic considering I'd probably spent that much on her over the years. But what struck me wasn't how beautiful she looked. It was the expression on her face. Pride. She was proud of this entrance, proud of making everyone wait, proud of the disruption they were causing. Not a single apology as they approached. No sorry we're late, or traffic was terrible, or even a polite acknowledgement that they'd kept 40 people waiting for over an hour. Instead, Judith waved her hand in this dismissive gesture that somehow managed to convey both greeting and condescension simultaneously. "Marcus, darling." She called out loud enough for everyone to hear. We made it. Traffic was absolutely dreadful, and Zara's lashes needed extra glue. You understand. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. An expectation that of course I'd understand. That their beauty routine and questionable time management took precedence over basic respect for me or the 40 other people who'd managed to arrive on time. The fact that they lived 20 minutes away and traffic in Seattle at 7 p.m. on a Saturday evening was actually pretty light didn't seem to factor into this narrative. I could feel David tense beside me, could see Reggie across the room, physically restraining himself from saying something that would definitely make things worse. My college friend Jenny actually mouthed, "Are you kidding me?" from her table. But I just smiled, because that's what I always did. I smiled and played along and pretended this was all perfectly normal behavior. "Of course," I said smoothly, walking over to greet them with all the grace of a man who'd had 10 years of practice swallowing his dignity. Priorities before punctuality. After all, what's a birthday party without properly glued lashes? The sarcasm in my voice was subtle enough that Judith and Zara missed it completely, but I saw Sophia's eyes narrow slightly. She knew. She always knew when I was being passive-aggressive, and usually she'd shoot me a warning look that said, "Behave yourself." But tonight she just smiled, like my sarcasm was cute instead of a symptom of a much bigger problem. The waiter who'd been standing nearby turned away quickly, and I swear I saw his shoulders shaking with suppressed laughter. At least someone appreciated my commentary. Philippe appeared with champagne flutes on a silver tray, ever the professional, though I caught him exchanging a glance with another staff member that clearly communicated rich people are the worst. They settled into the seats I'd reserved at the head table. The best seats in the house, naturally, with the perfect view of the string quartet and the rest of the room. Judith immediately started rearranging the place settings because apparently the professional event coordinator hadn't positioned the silverware to her exact specifications. Zara was still filming, panning across the room with commentary I couldn't quite hear but could definitely imagine. "So we're at Marcus's birthday thing, and oh my god, look at these centerpieces, they're actually kind of cute for a birthday party, very unexpected." Sophia caught my eye and smiled, and for just a second I saw something there. Maybe guilt, maybe acknowledgement that her family was being ridiculous, maybe just a plea for me to keep playing along like I always did. I smiled back, because what else was I going to do? Make a scene at my own birthday party? Tell them all to leave? I'd spent $40,000 on this evening, and I was going to endure it with grace even if it killed me. The rest of my guests had gone back to their conversations, the awkward pause of the Lee family's entrance fading into the background music and general party ambience. But I could see the looks, the raised eyebrows, the whispered comments. My friends weren't stupid. They could see exactly what was happening, could see the dynamic playing out in real time. David gave me a sympathetic pat on the shoulder as he walked past to refill his drink. Jenny shot me a look that clearly said, "We're talking about this later." And Reggie, bless his confrontational heart, was staring daggers at Judith with the intensity of a lawyer preparing to destroy a witness on the stand. Philippe appeared at my elbow, ever professional. "Shall we begin service now that all your guests have arrived?" The subtle emphasis on all was the closest thing to editorial commentary he'd allow himself, and I appreciated it more than he could know. "Yes, please," I said, finishing my champagne in one long swallow. "Let's get this party started." What I didn't know then, standing there with my forced smile and my expensive suit and my desperate need for validation, was that the party was about to get started in ways I couldn't possibly imagine. The entrance was just the opening act. The real performance was yet to come, and it would involve cranberry juice, public humiliation, and the final straw that would break this particular camel's back. But for now, I just smiled and played the gracious host, because that's what I always did. Dinner service began with all the precision and elegance you'd expect from a restaurant that charges more for an appetizer than most people spend on groceries for a week. Philippe's staff moved through the room like synchronized dancers, presenting each course with theatrical flair and descriptions that made simple food sound like edible poetry. Pan-seared scallops with a saffron-infused beurre blanc, microgreens from our rooftop garden, and a delicate citrus foam. Translation: expensive shellfish with butter sauce and some leaves. My friends were genuinely enjoying themselves, complimenting the food, engaging in actual conversations that didn't revolve around who was wearing what brand or which influencer was currently getting canceled on Twitter. David and his wife were trading stories with Jenny about their kids' college applications. Reggie was charming a table of my business associates with some hilarious courtroom anecdote involving a client who tried to represent himself and accidentally confessed to 3 additional crimes. It was exactly the kind of party I'd hoped for: warm, genuine, celebratory. And then there was the Lee family table. Judith had sent back her first course twice because the scallops weren't quite right. First too warm, then too cold, like she was Goldilocks but with shellfish and an attitude problem. Zara had taken approximately 47 photos of her plate from different angles before taking exactly 3 bites and declaring herself full. She was now scrolling through her phone, occasionally showing something to Sophia, who'd laugh in that fake way people do when they're not really paying attention but want to seem engaged. Sophia herself had barely touched her food, too busy holding court at their table, talking loudly enough that nearby tables kept glancing over. She was telling some story about a difficult client at her boutique, which was rich considering the boutique had maybe 5 customers a week, gesturing dramatically with her wine glass and making Judith and Zara laugh at what I'm sure were extremely witty observations about other people's fashion choices. It was between the 3rd and 4th courses, during that perfect lull when everyone had enough wine in them to be relaxed but not drunk, when Philippe had dimmed the lights slightly and the string quartet shifted to something softer, that Reggie stood up with his glass raised. The room quieted down, people turning their attention to him with genuine interest because Reggie was known for giving legendary toasts, funny, heartfelt, the kind that made you laugh and tear up simultaneously. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his lawyer voice carrying across the room with practiced ease, "I've known Marcus Bennett for over 20 years. We met in college when we were both broke, stupid, and convinced we were going to change the world." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Marcus was the guy who'd share his last cup of ramen with you, who'd stay up all night helping you study even when he had his own exam the next day, who'd loan you his only decent shirt for a job interview, and then wear a wrinkled mess to his own interview the next day. I could feel myself getting emotional, which was ridiculous because I'm a 40-year-old man at my own birthday party, but Reggie had this way of cutting through all the pretense and getting to the heart of things. Over the years, I've watched Marcus build an incredible business from absolutely nothing. I've watched him help friends, support causes he believes in, and remain one of the most genuinely good people I know despite having every reason to become cynical. He paused, looking directly at me with this expression that was part pride, part concern. Marcus Bennett is proof that good guys don't finish last. They just buy the restaurant. The room erupted in laughter and applause. People were clinking glasses, raising them in my direction, calling out agreements and well wishes. It was perfect. It was exactly what I needed to hear. For one shining moment, I felt truly seen and appreciated. And then Judith decided to contribute. She raised her glass with all the enthusiasm of someone being forced to acknowledge a parking meter, that tight smile on her face that I'd come to recognize as her performing graciousness expression. The room quieted again, everyone politely waiting to hear what the mother-in-law would say. "Please," I thought desperately, "just this once say something nice. Just once acknowledge that I'm not completely worthless." "To Marcus," she began, her voice carrying that particular tone that rich people use when they're pretending to be humble. "Our dependable man who's always." She paused, and I swear that pause contained every ounce of condescension she'd cultivated over 60 years of looking down on people she considered beneath her. Around, not there for us, not supportive, not wonderful or generous, or any of the adjectives you might use for someone who'd been financially supporting your family for a decade. Just around, like I was a piece of furniture, a lamp that happened to be present. The houseplant nobody noticed until it needed watering. The silence that followed was deafening. My friends looked uncomfortable, exchanging glances that clearly communicated, did she really just say that? David's wife actually gasped quietly. Jenny's mouth fell open. Even Philippe, the consummate professional, looked momentarily shocked. But Zara? Oh, Zara wasn't about to let that moment pass without adding her own special touch. She giggled, actually giggled like a middle schooler who just heard someone swear, and added loudly enough for everyone to hear. "And always paying." The Lee table erupted in laughter. Judith threw her head back, like it was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. Sophia was laughing too, that genuine laugh she usually reserved for actually funny things, not public humiliation of her husband. They were having a moment, the 3 of them, bonding over their shared joke at my expense while 40 of my friends and colleagues sat there witnessing my wife's family treat me like a punchline. I felt David tense beside me, saw Reggie's face go from shocked to furious in about half a second, heard Jenny mutter, "Oh hell no," under her breath. The string quartet had stopped playing. The musicians looking at each other uncertainly like they weren't sure if they should resume or if someone was about to flip a table. And me? I just sat there, that same smile frozen on my face, holding my champagne glass like it was a life preserver. Because what else was I supposed to do? Make a scene? Tell my mother-in-law and sister-in-law exactly what I thought of them in front of everyone? Divorce my wife right there between courses 3 and 4? So I laughed. Not a real laugh. I'd forgotten what those felt like around the Lee family, but a performance of a laugh that said, I'm in on the joke. This doesn't bother me. We're all just having fun here. I raised my glass and said, to being dependable and financially responsible, someone's got to keep this family solvent. A few people laughed, but it was that uncomfortable laughter that happens when someone makes a joke that's a little too close to a cry for help. Reggie wasn't laughing at all. He was staring at Sophia with an expression that clearly communicated he was mentally drafting divorce papers on my behalf. The servers, bless them, chose that moment to bring out the next course, creating a distraction that allowed the conversation to shift, the tension to dissipate slightly, the party to limp forward into its next phase. But something had shifted. My friends had seen it, really seen it. The dynamic, the disrespect, the casual cruelty disguised as family banter. There was no unseeing it now. Sophia leaned over to me as the servers placed our plates, touching my arm in what I'm sure she thought was an affectionate gesture. You okay, baby? You know they're just joking around. Don't be so sensitive. Don't be so sensitive. For words that had become the chorus of our marriage, the refrain she sang every time her family crossed a line. Don't be so sensitive when they mock your background. Don't be so sensitive when they treat you like the help. Don't be so sensitive when they publicly humiliate you at your own birthday party. I looked at her, really looked at her, and something in my chest went cold and quiet. I'm fine, I said flatly. Perfectly fine. She smiled, satisfied, and turned back to her mother and sister who were already whispering about something else, probably planning their next Bon Mot. And I sat there, fork in hand, staring at a plate of food I could no longer taste, calculating exactly how much this evening of humiliation had cost me per insult. Dessert arrived with all the theatrical pageantry Philippe could muster, probably sensing that this party needed all the distraction it could get. The lights dimmed to almost darkness, and then the servers emerged from the kitchen carrying this elaborate chocolate sculpture that looked more like modern art than something you were supposed to eat. It was 3 tiers of dark chocolate architectural madness with Happy 40th Marcus written across the base in actual gold leaf, surrounded by what I'm pretty sure were edible flowers that cost more per petal than most bouquets. The room erupted in appreciative gasps and applause. Someone started singing Happy Birthday, and everyone joined in, even the string quartet, who somehow made it sound elegant instead of awkward. For a moment, watching 40 people sing to me with genuine warmth, I felt that flutter of hope again. That stupid, persistent hope that maybe the evening could still be salvaged, that maybe this would be the memory I'd keep instead of all the cringeworthy moments that had come before. But then I caught Zara leaning over to Sophia, whispering something with this wicked little smirk plastered across her face. Sophia's eyes lit up in that way they did when she and her sister were plotting something they found hilarious and everyone else would find horrifying. They were giggling like teenagers planning a prank, and I felt my stomach drop because I knew. I just knew that whatever they were planning, I was the target. Zara reached for her cranberry mocktail. She'd been nursing the same glass all evening because apparently she was on some cleanse that prohibited alcohol but allowed designer drugs at music festivals, because priorities. The glass was still nearly full, that deep red liquid catching the light from the chandeliers, and I watched in what felt like slow motion as she picked it up with deliberate care. Our eyes met across the table. She smiled. Not a friendly smile. Not even a mischievous smile. It was the smile of someone who'd been waiting all evening for this moment, who'd probably been planning it since the invitations went out, who was about to do something spectacular and knew there wouldn't be consequences because there never were consequences for Zara. Time did that weird thing where it speeds up and slows down simultaneously. I saw her hand tilt, saw the liquid begin to move, saw Judith's eyes widen slightly, not in horror or an attempt to stop it, but in anticipation. Saw Sophia cover her mouth, but not to gasp, to hide her smile. And then I felt it. Cold. So incredibly cold. The cranberry juice hit my chest like a shock, spreading across that midnight blue Tom Ford fabric in an expanding stain that looked like someone had shot me with a fruit-flavored weapon. The liquid soaked through immediately, seeping through my shirt to my skin, dripping down onto my pants, my Italian leather shoes, pooling on the floor around my chair. The entire room went silent. And I mean silent. The kind of silence where you could hear individual heartbeats and the slight creak of someone shifting in their chair. The string quartet stopped mid-note. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the servers froze in place like someone had hit pause on reality. Zara's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "Now you look as cheap as you really are." Judith clapped. Actually clapped her hands together in delight like her daughter had just performed a perfect piano recital instead of assaulting her son-in-law with a beverage. The sound echoed through the silent room, sharp and mocking. And Sophia? My wife. My partner? The woman I'd pledged my life to? She was beaming with pride, looking at her sister with such admiration you'd think Zara had just cured cancer instead of publicly humiliating her husband on his 40th birthday. I could hear Reggie pushing back his chair, his voice starting to form words that were probably going to include several variations of profanity and legal threats. Could see David and Ginny and half my other friends preparing to either intervene or join in the confrontation. Could feel the entire room holding its breath, waiting to see how this would play out, whether this would turn into the kind of scene that people would talk about for years. But here's the thing about reaching your breaking point. Sometimes it doesn't look like an explosion. Sometimes it looks like the calmest you've ever been. Sometimes clarity hits you like ice water, and suddenly you're not angry or hurt or embarrassed. You're just done. Completely, utterly, irrevocably done. I picked up my napkin with careful precision, dabbed at the spreading stain on my chest like I was blotting up a minor spill instead of cleaning up evidence of assault. Looked directly at Zara with the calmest expression I'd ever worn and said, "You know, most people just buy cards." The laugh I got from my side of the room was genuine, relieved, the kind of laughter that happens when someone defuses tension with humor instead of violence. But I wasn't joking. Or rather, I was joking, but there was steel underneath it that I don't think anyone quite caught in that moment. I stood up, still smiling, cranberry juice dripping from my suit jacket onto the imported Italian linen tablecloth that probably cost more to clean than replace. "If you'll excuse me for just a moment," I said to the room at large, my voice perfectly pleasant, perfectly controlled. "I need to visit the restroom and assess the damage." Philippe appeared at my elbow immediately, his professional composure cracked just enough that I could see genuine concern. "Mr. Bennett, I am so terribly sorry. Please let me." I held up a hand, still smiling that eerie calm smile. "Not your fault, Philippe. Family dynamics, you know how it is." I pulled out my wallet and handed him $500 bills. "For the staff. They've been exceptional tonight, and they shouldn't suffer because my in-laws have the collective maturity of a middle school cafeteria table." His eyes widened at the tip. It was more than generous, bordering on excessive, but he pocketed it with a subtle nod. "The security cameras in this room are always recording," he said quietly, meeting my eyes with an expression that communicated more than his words. "For liability purposes, you understand. The footage is kept for 90 days. I smiled wider. How fortunate. In the bathroom, I stared at my reflection in the mirror. $5,000 worth of custom tailoring ruined by cranberry juice and spite. My shirt was destroyed. My jacket probably salvageable, but never quite the same. But looking at myself, at the red stains spreading across my chest like a target, I felt something shift inside me that had nothing to do with the clothes. This was it. This was the moment I'd look back on and recognize as the turning point. Not just of the evening, but of my entire relationship with this family, with Sophia, with the version of myself who'd spent a decade accepting unacceptable behavior because I was too desperate for approval to demand respect. I pulled out my phone and made 3 calls. The first to my lawyer, Paul, who'd been telling me for years that I needed better financial protection in my marriage. It went to voicemail because it was Saturday night and normal people weren't working, but I left a message. "Paul, it's Marcus. I need to meet Monday morning first thing. It's time we had that conversation about asset protection and separate finances. I'll explain everything then." The second call was to my financial advisor, Derek, who also didn't answer, but whose voicemail got a similar message. "Derek, Marcus, Monday morning. I need a complete audit of every account, every card, every financial connection to my wife's family. Time to close some doors. The third call was to my assistant, Monica, who actually answered because she was terrifyingly efficient and apparently never slept. Marcus? Is everything okay? Isn't tonight your party? It was, I said calmly. Monica, I need you to pull together some documentation for me. Every receipt, every transfer, every loan or gift to my wife's family for the past 10 years. Everything. Can you have that ready by Monday? There was a pause, and then Monica's voice came back sharp and focused. Oh, we're finally doing this. About damn time. I'll have everything organized and categorized by Sunday evening. I hung up and looked at myself in the mirror one more time. The old Marcus would have gone back out there, laughed it off, paid the bill, and driven everyone home while they made jokes about his cranberry situation. He would have gotten the suit cleaned, replaced it if necessary, and moved on like nothing had happened because that's what doormats do. They absorb the mess and ask for more. But the new Marcus? The one staring back at me with cranberry juice drying on his chest and steel in his eyes? He had other plans. Because here's what none of them knew, what none of them had bothered to find out because they'd never seen me as anything more than a wallet with legs. I was actually good at my job. Really good. And part of being good at cybersecurity and business consulting meant understanding systems, finding vulnerabilities, and knowing exactly how to shut things down when necessary. Sophia's boutique? Running on accounts I controlled. The credit cards I'd given to Judith and Zara? All linked to my primary account with me as the sole authorized user. The house we lived in my name only because I'd bought it before we got married and Sophia had never pushed to be added to the deed. Our joint account had exactly enough for household expenses, while my business accounts, the real money, were completely separate and protected. I'd never thought of it as protection before. Just seemed like smart financial management, keeping business and personal finances separate, maintaining control over my company's assets. But now I realized I'd accidentally built the perfect foundation for exactly what needed to happen next. I went back out to the party with my ruined suit and my new resolve, smiled through the rest of the evening like nothing had fundamentally shifted in my entire worldview, and even gave a gracious speech thanking everyone for coming. Sophia tried to brush off the incident on the drive home, laughing nervously and saying, "You know how they are, Marcus. Don't be so dramatic about it. It was just a joke." I said nothing, just smiled and poured myself a glass of wine when we got home. That expensive Cabernet she'd insisted we buy from some boutique vineyard that cost $200 a bottle. "Of course, dear," I said smoothly. "Wouldn't want to ruin their fun." She looked at me strangely then, like she'd heard something in my voice she didn't recognize. But the moment passed, and she went upstairs to bed. I stayed up until 3 in the morning, going through files and accounts, making lists, preparing. By Sunday afternoon, Monica had sent over a comprehensive spreadsheet that made my jaw drop even though I'd been the one funding everything. Seeing it all laid out in black and white, $547,000 over 10 years, was something else entirely. Monday morning at 8 a.m. sharp, I was in Paul's office. By 9, I was at the bank. By 10, every single card connected to my accounts had been canceled. Credit cards, debit cards, the store cards I'd co-signed for, everything. One by one, I watched the bank representative click through screens, terminating access with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before and understood exactly what was happening. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Bennett?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "This is quite extensive. I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I replied. The fallout was spectacular. By Monday afternoon, my phone started blowing up. First text from Zara at 2:47 p.m. My card isn't working? Sephora just declined it, and I'm literally standing at the register. This is so embarrassing." Then Judith at 3:15 p.m. "Marcus, there seems to be some issue with my account. The property management company says my rent payment bounced. Can you please look into this immediately?" Sophia at 3:52 p.m. "What's going on? Mom is freaking out and Zara is having a meltdown. Did you forget to pay something?" I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I had Monica email them all a carefully worded message with attached documentation, a spreadsheet detailing every single expense I'd covered over the past decade, itemized and categorized with dates and amounts. The email was polite, professional, and absolutely devastating. "Dear family, after reviewing our household finances, I've decided to implement some necessary changes. Effective immediately, all supplementary accounts and credit cards have been closed. This decision comes after careful consideration of our financial future and sustainability. For your reference, I've attached a comprehensive overview of expenses covered over the past 10 years. Please note that these were gifts freely given and are not requests for repayment. However, going forward, I will be unable to continue this level of financial support. I'm sure you understand that at 40, it's time for me to focus on my own financial security and retirement planning. I have complete faith that each of you, as capable adults, will find your own paths to financial independence. Best regards, Marcus. The group chat exploded within minutes. My phone literally wouldn't stop buzzing. The messages ranged from confused to angry to outright hostile. Zara sent me 17 texts in a row, escalating from "this must be a mistake" to "you can't just do this" to "Sophia needs to divorce you immediately." Judith left a voicemail that was 2 full minutes of barely controlled rage disguised as concern, saying things like, "How could you embarrass us this way? And what will people think? And we're family, Marcus." But Sophia's reaction was the one that mattered. She came home from the boutique at 6 p.m., walked into my home office where I was calmly working on a client proposal, and stood in the doorway with her phone in her hand and fury in her eyes. "What the hell did you do?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "My mom's landlord is threatening eviction. Zara's car payment bounced, and my boutique supplier account was declined this morning. Marcus, what is happening?" I looked up from my laptop, adjusted my glasses, and gave her the same calm smile I'd been practicing since Saturday night. "I'm treating you like a partner, darling. A silent partner. You said I should, remember? You wanted the business to be independent. Well, congratulations, it's independent now." "This isn't funny." "You're absolutely right." I agreed. "It's not funny at all. Kind of like having cranberry juice dumped on you at your own birthday party while your wife watches with pride." That wasn't particularly funny either. Her face went pale. "So this is about Saturday?" "Marcus, I told you, they were just joking, I know. You've said that a lot over the years." I closed my laptop and stood up. "Here's the thing, Sophia. I spent 10 years being the punchline to your family's jokes and the solution to their financial problems. I'm done with both roles. Your boutique is yours, figure it out. Your mother's rent is her problem. Your sister's lifestyle maintenance is not my responsibility. You can't just cut us off." "Actually," I said, pulling out the folder Paul had prepared, "I can. Every card was in my name. Every account was mine. I was generous, perhaps too generous, but that was my choice. And now I'm making a different choice." She stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "I don't even know who you are right now." "Funny," I said. "I was thinking the same thing about you on Saturday night, when you laughed while your sister humiliated me." For once in our marriage, Sophia had no comeback. The next few weeks were absolutely glorious in the most petty, satisfying way imaginable. I didn't have to do anything except exist and watch karma work its magic through the grapevine of mutual friends and social media. Turns out when you cut off someone's unlimited funding, they have to face something they've spent years avoiding: reality. Reggie became my primary source of intel, mostly because he was friends with some of Zara's former influencer circle who were more than happy to share the tea. Apparently, Zara had posted a long, rambling Instagram story about toxic family members who abandon you in your time of need, with a black and white photo of herself looking pensively out a window. The comments were not sympathetic. Several people pointed out that maybe getting a job would help with her financial situation, which sent her into another spiral of stories about misunderstood creative entrepreneurs. But here's where it gets better. She actually had to get a real job, not a brand partnership or a collaboration. An actual show-up-and-work-for-hourly wages job. Through the grapevine, I heard she was waitressing at some trendy brunch place in Capitol Hill. Naturally, she tried to spin it on social media as experiencing life from different perspectives for content and connecting with the service industry for authenticity. Her followers weren't buying it, especially when someone posted a screenshot of her earlier stories complaining about waitstaff at restaurants. The Instagram posts from her first week were comedy gold. Pictures of her feet with captions like, "Who knew standing for 8 hours was this hard?" #RealLife, #Hustle Mode, #ServerLife. Videos of her learning to use the POS system with guys. Technology is so complicated when you're in the trenches. #Respect. She lasted exactly 2.5 weeks before posting about how the environment wasn't aligned with her personal growth journey, and she needed to focus on her brand. Translation: someone asked her to actually work instead of taking selfies in the walk-in cooler. Judith's situation was equally entertaining. The wine cooler, that $8,000 monstrosity that could probably achieve consciousness, appeared on Facebook Marketplace with the description, "Luxury wine storage, barely used, minor scratches." She was asking $7,500 for something she'd begged me to buy 6 months ago. Last I checked through my fake account I created specifically for stalking purposes, she dropped the price 3 times and was now at $4,000 with "must sell ASAP" in all caps. Her house, that colonial monument to excess in Bellevue, suddenly had a "for rent" sign in the yard. She'd moved to a condo in Renton, still nice, but definitely a downgrade from the neighborhood where she used to hold court like suburban royalty. The best part? I heard through David's wife, who ran in similar social circles, that Judith had been telling people she chose to downsize for environmental reasons and was embracing minimalism. Sure, January. Nothing says environmental consciousness like being forced to sell your stuff because your cash cow finally grew a spine. But Sophia's struggle was the one that hit different. The boutique, Bell & Breyer, limped along for about 6 weeks after I cut funding. She tried everything: sales, Instagram promotions, reaching out to every contact she had. Turns out when your entire business model depends on someone else's money and you've spent years building a brand instead of building actual business acumen, things fall apart pretty quickly. The supplier started calling me directly since my name was on all the original contracts. I politely informed them that I was no longer associated with the business, and they should contact the owner, Miss Sophia Lee. The look on her face when she came home and told me the Italian leather goods company wanted their payment or they'd sue was priceless. "They said you set up the account," she'd said, her voice small in a way I'd never heard before. "That you personally guaranteed payment." "I did," I confirmed. "And then I sent them documentation terminating my involvement and removing my guarantee. Ball's in your court now, partner." She'd stared at me like I was a stranger. "When did you become so cold?" "I'm not cold, Sophia. I'm just done being warm to people who treat me like an ATM with a pulse." I'd gone back to my laptop, effectively ending the conversation. Your business, your problem. Isn't that what independence means? By week 8, Bell & Breyer had a store closing sale sign in the window. "Everything must go, 50 to 70% off." I drove by once, just to see it, and found myself feeling absolutely nothing. No satisfaction, no guilt, no regret. Just the quiet certainty that I'd made the right choice. The final update came from Monica, who'd been monitoring social media and news outlets like the thorough professional she was. Zara had pivoted to promoting some multi-level marketing scheme, essential oils or supplements, or whatever pyramid scheme was currently trending. Judith had gotten a part-time job as a receptionist at a dental office, which apparently was just to stay busy and give back to the community. And Sophia had taken a job as a sales associate at Nordstrom, folding clothes and working commission, trying to rebuild enough money to figure out what came next. When Sophia confronted me about the divorce papers, because of course I'd filed, why would I stay in a marriage that had been a business transaction disguised as a partnership? She'd asked me if I felt good about destroying her family. I'd looked at her, really looked at her, and felt that same calm that had settled over me the night of my birthday. "I didn't destroy anything, Sophia. I just stopped building it for you. There's a difference. You're really going to throw away 10 years. "No," I'd said quietly. "You threw it away the night you laughed while your sister humiliated me. I'm just acknowledging what's been true for a while now. We were never actually partners. I was a resource you married, and you all finally drained the well dry." She'd left without another word. The papers were signed within a month. 1 year later, I stood in my new apartment in Ballard. A sleek 2-bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Puget Sound, getting ready for my 41st birthday party. And by party, I mean an actual party with people who genuinely liked me, not a performance designed to prove my worth to people who'd already decided I had none. The difference was night and day, and I felt it in every cell of my body. The apartment was mine, just mine, with furniture I'd picked out myself instead of letting someone else dictate my taste. Turns out I actually like comfortable couches and art that means something to me instead of pieces chosen purely because they photograph well. I had books on the shelves that I'd actually read, not coffee table decorations that existed solely to signal sophistication to visitors. The place felt like home in a way my old house never had, despite being a fraction of the size and probably a tenth of the pretentiousness. I looked at myself in the mirror, adjusting the collar of my shirt, a simple button-down from J.Crew that cost maybe $60 and fit me perfectly. No Tom Ford, no designer labels, no desperate need to prove anything through my wardrobe choices. Just a decent shirt that looked good and didn't require a second mortgage. My therapist, Dr. Chun. Yeah, I got a therapist after the divorce because apparently realizing you've wasted a decade of your life with people who didn't value you requires some professional unpacking. Would have been proud of how far I'd come in the self-worth department. You know you don't need to prove anything to anyone, right? She'd asked during one of our sessions a few months back. Not to them, not to yourself. You're enough just as you are. It had taken me 40 years to start believing that, but better late than never, right? The doorbell rang at exactly 7 p.m. because my real friends actually showed up on time like functional adults, and I opened it to find Reggie standing there with a six-pack of craft beer and the biggest grin I'd seen in months. Birthday boy, ready to celebrate being officially divorced and significantly wealthier without the Lee family dragging you down. You know it, I said, pulling him in for a hug. Come on in. Fair warning though, we have actual food instead of molecular gastronomy, and the beer is cold but not imported from a specific region of Belgium. Thank God, Reggie laughed, heading straight for the kitchen. Last year's party was beautiful, but I'm pretty sure I spent the whole night hungry because I didn't understand what I was eating. Over the next hour, people trickled in. David and his wife, Jenny and her partner, a bunch of colleagues from work, Monica, who'd become a genuine friend after helping me document my financial independence, and even Derek, my accountant, who showed up with champagne and a card that said, "Congratulations on your improved financial outlook." Inside he'd written, "Best investment you ever made was divesting from that family. Your portfolio thanks you." And then there was Eva. Eva Martinez, an architect I'd met at a coffee shop 3 months ago when we'd both reached for the last blueberry muffin at the same time and ended up splitting it while talking for 2 hours straight. She was smart, funny, had her own thriving business designing sustainable housing, and most importantly, she paid for her own coffee. That sounds like a low bar, and maybe it is, but after a decade with the Lee family, a woman who insisted on splitting the check felt revolutionary. She arrived carrying a small wrapped box and wearing jeans and a sweater that probably cost less than Sophia used to spend on a single shoe. And she looked absolutely beautiful in that effortless way that comes from actual confidence instead of designer labels. "Happy birthday, Marcus," she said, kissing my cheek. "Hope you're ready for terrible karaoke later because Reggie promised me you do an excellent Bon Jovi impression when sufficiently intoxicated." Reggie's a liar, and I'm suing him for defamation, I called out, making her laugh as I pulled her inside and introduced her to everyone. The party was everything last year's wasn't. We ate pizza from the local place down the street that made pies so good they'd been featured in the Seattle Times. We drank beer and wine that tasted good without requiring a sommelier to explain why. We played board games and told embarrassing stories and laughed until our sides hurt. Nobody showed up late to make a statement. Nobody insulted me disguised as humor. Nobody expected me to fund their lifestyle or tolerate disrespect in exchange for the privilege of their company. Around 10 p.m., Reggie stood up with his beer raised, and the room quieted down naturally, everyone turning their attention to him with genuine interest and affection. All right, speech time. I know, you all love when I talk." Laughter rippled through the group. Last year, I gave a toast about Marcus being one of the best people I know, and then I had to watch his ex-family treat him like garbage at his own party. That sucked. A lot. I felt Eva squeeze my hand. A simple gesture of support that made my chest feel warm in a way I'd forgotten was possible. But this year, Reggie continued, his voice getting more serious. "This year I get to toast to Marcus doing what he should have done years ago, recognizing his own worth and refusing to accept anything less than respect. This man right here rebuilt his entire life, cut out toxic people who didn't deserve him, and came out the other side happier, healthier, and rocking a seriously nice apartment with a view that makes me want to quit law and pursue architecture just so I can justify spending this much on rent." More laughter, and Eva leaned over and whispered, "The rent's not that high. He's just dramatic," which made me smile. To Marcus, Reggie raised his glass higher, who proved that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's just living well and refusing to fund anyone else's dysfunction. Happy 41st, my man. This year is going to be your year. Everyone cheered and clinked glasses, and I felt something in my chest that I hadn't felt in longer than I could remember. Pure, uncomplicated happiness. No anxiety about whether I was doing enough or being enough or spending enough. Just the simple joy of being surrounded by people who actually liked me for me, not for what I could provide them. Later, after most people had left and it was just me, Eva, Reggie, and a couple of other close friends lounging on my comfortable, non-performative furniture, my phone buzzed with a text. I almost ignored it. I'd gotten good at that over the past year, at not being constantly available to everyone else's needs and demands. But something made me check it. It was from Sophia. Happy birthday, Marcus. Hope you're doing well. I stared at the message for a long moment, feeling absolutely nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no lingering hurt. Just the distant recognition that this message came from someone who used to be important in my life and no longer was. A chapter that had closed completely. Eva noticed my expression. Everything okay? Yeah, I said, genuinely meaning it. I typed out a response, keeping it simple and honest. Thanks. I finally am. I didn't elaborate, didn't explain, didn't leave the door open for further conversation. Just acknowledged her message and moved on, which felt like the perfect metaphor for where I was in life. Who was that? Reggie asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. Nobody important, I said, setting my phone down and picking up my beer. Just someone from my past who's firmly staying there. Eva smiled at me, and I smiled back, feeling the weight of the past year settle into something that felt less like loss and more like liberation. Sure, I'd lost a wife and her family, but I'd gained something far more valuable, myself. My self-respect, my boundaries, my understanding that love shouldn't cost everything you have to give and still leave you empty. The conversation drifted to other topics. Eva's latest project designing affordable housing units, Reggie's upcoming trial that was apparently going to be legendary in all the best ways, David's kid getting into MIT. Normal stuff. Good stuff. The kind of conversations that fill your life when you stop surrounding yourself with people who drain it. Around midnight, as people started heading out, I walked Eva to her car. The Seattle night was crisp and clear, rare for October, and you could actually see stars between the city lights. Thank you for coming, I said, taking her hand. For being here. For being you. Where else would I be? She replied simply. This is exactly where I want to be. And standing there on the street outside my apartment building, holding hands with a woman who chose to be there instead of feeling entitled to be there, I realized something profound. My 40th birthday had been the worst night of my life, the culmination of a decade of gradually losing myself to people who never valued what they had. But it had also been the catalyst for everything good that came after. Sometimes you have to hit rock bottom, or in my case, get hit with cranberry juice, to realize you've been living in a hole and it's time to climb out. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the best thing, because it finally gives you the clarity and courage to change what you should have changed years ago. What are you thinking about? Eva asked, studying my face in the streetlight. Just that I'm grateful, I said honestly. For last year's disaster, for learning what I deserved, for cranberry juice and public humiliation and hitting my breaking point. Because all of that led to this. To right now. To being genuinely happy for the first time in longer than I can remember. She kissed me then, soft and sweet and uncomplicated, and I thought about how different this felt from anything I'd experienced with Sophia. This felt like partnership instead of patronage, like mutual respect instead of one-sided obligation, like building something together instead of funding someone else's vision while pretending I was included. Later, after Eva left and I was alone in my apartment, I poured myself a glass of whiskey, the good stuff I'd bought myself as a birthday present, and stood by the window looking out at the city lights reflecting off the water. Somewhere out there, Sophia was probably working her shift at Nordstrom. Zara was probably posting about her latest MLM adventure. Judith was probably still telling people she'd chosen to downsize for philosophical reasons instead of financial necessity. And me? I was here, in my own space, living my own life, free from the weight of other people's expectations and entitlement. Not because I destroyed them or sought revenge or become the villain in their story. But because I'd finally done the simplest, hardest thing, I'd valued myself enough to stop accepting less than I deserved. I raised my glass to my reflection in the window, to the man looking back at me who'd spent 40 years learning to be what other people needed and 1 year learning to be enough for himself. Happy birthday, Marcus, I said out loud to the empty apartment. Here's to learning that peace isn't bought, it's earned, one canceled credit card at a time. The city lights twinkled back at me like a million tiny affirmations, and I drank to new beginnings, to hard lessons learned, to the beautiful simplicity of finally being free. And somewhere in the universe, I like to imagine karma was taking notes, making sure that cranberry juice stain on my $5,000 suit had been worth every penny. Because looking at my life now, at the genuine happiness and peace I'd found on the other side of that humiliation, it absolutely was.